Hi, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, welcome to this meeting of the Colchester City Council Local Plan Committee. My name's Councillor Martin Parsons and I'm chairing this evening. To my right is the Vice Chair, who I will let introduce themselves shortly. The meeting's being live streamed and will be available to view after the meeting on the Council's YouTube channel. A few matters of housekeeping. In the event of an emergency, no practice alarms are planned for this evening, but if the alarm does sound, please evacuate via the nearest emergency exits, either down the main stairs or the back stairs to High Street and then to the car park behind the Town Hall in St Runwald Street. And we will have a short break at 90-minute intervals. And please could speakers use microphones at all times, speak directly into the microphone, and would you please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Use of mobile phones as devices, including cameras, by visitors is welcomed. Please use them discreetly, don't disturb the meetings, and could I ask everyone to set them to silent at this point if you've not already done so, and not use voice or camera flash functions. Please also note that the ladies' toilets on this floor are out of action, so could I ask members of the public please to use the lady members of the public to use the toilets on the ground floor. And I'm now going to ask members of the panel and officers to introduce themselves. Starting on my right, we'll go round with the officers and then pick up, coming round in this direction. Amy.
Councillor Amy Kirkby-Taylor for Castle Ward and Vice Chair.
Karen Syrett, Strategic Growth and Infrastructure Manager.
Sandra Scott, Place Strategy Manager.
James Ryan, Service Director, Planning, Sustainability and Climate Change.
Rachel Forkin, Principal Planning Policy Officer.
Ben Plummer, Senior Planning Policy Officer.
Councillor Jeremy Hagan, Stanway Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Paul Dundas. I represent Tiptree Ward, and this evening I'm substituting for Councillor Sue Lissimore.
Councillor Vanessa Moffat from Island Ward.
Councillor Paul Smith, Anson St John's Ward.
Councillor Thomas Rowe from Rural North Ward.
Councillor Lee Scorers for Old Heath, Hive and Rowhedge.
Councillor Tim Young, Greenstead Ward.
Councillor Sean Kelly, Wivenhoe Ward, substituting for Councillor Natalie Summers.
Councillor Mike Saunders, Stanway Ward.
Sam McLean, Newtown and Christchurch.
Madam Losmer, Democratic Services Officer.
Lindsay Barker, Deputy Chief Executive.
Thank you. And so we've just had notice of two substitutions there, Councillor Kelly for Councillor Somers and Councillor Dundas for Councillor Lissimore. There are no urgent items, so I'm going to ask councillors for any declarations of interest. I take it that's no declarations of interest, so we will move on to the minutes of the meeting on the 29th of June. Could I have a proposer that those are a correct record, unless anyone wishes to challenge any items? We've not heard any challenges in advance. Okay, can I have a proposer for, thank you, Councillor Tim Young, and can we have a seconder, please? Councillor Vanessa Moffat. Those in favour? Thank you very much. And just for the benefit of members of the public, those who weren't voting, it's because they weren't actually present at that meeting and they are substituting in for someone else. That is, I believe, carried. Thank you very much. Okay, we are... Right.
You can say that.
Okay, so we've changed the order of the agenda so that that the Have Your Say speakers visiting councillors will be invited to speak after Sandra Scott, Place Strategy Manager, has presented the report. We're doing that because we were in a situation beginning of last year in a similar meeting where the first part of the meeting took so long that councillors had very little time to actually debate. And obviously in a representative democracy that is the core of the meeting and that is central to democracy. So we've just rejigged that so that officers are not repeating themselves when they respond to Have Your Say. So, Sandra, over to you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. The Local Plan Committee are being asked to make an important decision this evening in respect of the Colchester Local Plan. Work on the plan commenced in 2023 and engagement, consultation and collection of evidence have all informed the draft submission plan before the committee today. Proceeding to consultation on the draft submission plan marks an important advanced milestone. Members are asked this evening to agree to the submission draft local plan and sustainability appraisal to proceed to consultation under Regulation 19 of the planning legislation. It is not the final plan. It is the version of the plan that is recommended for consultation ahead of it being submitted to government for independent examination before the end of the year. Officers commend the plan, which is considered to be suitable to proceed to consultation and submission. It meets all the tests required at this stage, including identifies how all the projected needs that are required can be met up to 2043 and includes strategic policies and other policies to support and manage this. It is consistent with national policy. It is justified by evidence which is proportionate and appropriate. It has followed all procedural and legal requirements. It's been positively prepared and it is an effective and deliverable plan. The plan will be subject to change following examination. Modifications will be required and agreed in response to representations received to this consultation and as a result of hearing sessions in front of an inspector. The report presents the submission draft local plan and policies map for the proposed consultation. The plan and maps are attached in full as Appendix A. The sustainability appraisal of the plan is also subject to consultation, which is attached as Appendix B. Two short addendums have also been circulated since the papers were published, detailing a number of proposed amendments and corrections to the plan. In addition, the Council's response to the issues raised by the representations received to the preferred options plan are appended to the report at Appendix C, which members are asked to note. Appendix D sets out the significant public representations, that is as defined in the Council resolution at the Council meeting on the 22nd of July this year, identifying the responses which were received to Regulation 18 Preferred Options Consultation in accordance with the requirements of that resolution in relation to the consideration and reporting of public representations in preparing the local plan. Most of the strategic policies and development management policies were considered and agreed by Local Plan Committee on the 29th of June. This report summarises any substantial changes which have been made to those policies since. It also sets out the consideration and proposed amendments to the few strategic and development management policies which were not presented in June. The report goes on to summarise the consideration of all of the place policies which set out the proposed allocations for housing and employment growth. It highlights the approach taken to consider the site allocations, including addressing issues raised by the consultation and evidence updates to help inform the allocations and the proposed policy wording.
The key changes to allocations, of which there have been a number, and the nature of the amendments to the place policies are highlighted in the report. The consideration of the issues raised with the responses in Appendix C and updated evidence have all informed the revisions to the proposed policies in the draft plan. Although it is the site allocations and place policies which attract the most interest and concern, it is the whole plan which is proposed for consultation, which will provide an up-to-date framework not only to shape and influence growth and delivery of supporting infrastructure, but also support development management decision-making. The report provides a summary of the evidence which has been updated since the Regulation 18 consultation. And finally, the report sets out the details of the proposed consultation subject to agreement to proceed by committee this evening. This stage is known as the Regulation 19 consultation. Responses to the submission draft plan under this consultation that are invited at this stage need to focus on some specific questions. Is it justified? Has it been positively prepared? Is it deliverable and effective? Is it legally compliant? Anyone submitting comments will also be asked to indicate why they consider the plan fails any of these tests and what they recommend needs to be changed to address the concerns. The responses received to Regulation 19 consultation will be reported back to Local Plan Committee prior to submission, at which time the committee will be asked to agree to submit the plan to the Secretary of State, having considered the representations received. Unlike the previous consultation, the detailed consideration of responses and the need to make changes to the plan will be down to an independent inspector via an examination after submission. The examination is in public and all valid representations will be considered by the appointed inspector. Anyone wishing to participate in the examination to seek to influence the plan further must make a representation to this Regulation 19 consultation. Previous Regulation 18 representations cannot be relied upon to take part in the examination. The report is very detailed and covers the considerations relevant to the decision this evening. Myself, Karen and the team here this evening will address any questions and points as they arise during discussion. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Sandra. Just before we move to have your say, I'm just going to make a few general comments about what we've got to do as a committee tonight. If you look round this table here, none of these councillors stood for election as a councillor because they wanted to impose big housing estates next to people's houses who didn't want them. We all feel very, very deeply about our local community. Our local community is where we have many of our personal relationships. Where we live actually creates that community. This is hugely important to us, and we all around this table understand quite how strongly many people feel about this. We're in many respects in a situation of forced choice. The option of simply keeping the places we all live the same has not been made open to us. And I'm really sorry about that, and I understand the frustrations and the emotions that many people feel. I would just ask that tonight you treat the councillors and the officers with respect, because all of them are in a really difficult position. Now, what we've got to do tonight is decide, do we approve the draft local plan going to the pre-inspection consultation? We had one consultation earlier. Some changes have been made, not huge changes, but some changes. So we now need to have another consultation on those changes before it goes to the planning inspectorate. If we vote not to send that out to consultation. For reasons I'll explain in just a minute, the Colchester area will not have a local plan. In fact, it will probably not be able to have a local plan for the next 5 years. The reason for that is there is a deadline of the 31st of December this year by which we have to submit the existing draft local plan. If we don't hit that deadline, there is a completely new local plan process the government has introduced that kicks in from the 1st of January, that is a 3-year process with specific timelines at which different bits of evidence have to be submitted. This council will not exist in 3 years' time. The council will cease to exist on the 31st of March 2028. So we haven't got 3 years. So the earliest that another local plan for the Colchester area could even be started would be the date the new unitary council for North East Essex starts. So we're looking at about 2031 before there would be a local plan. So the choice tonight that officers have to make is whether to put this local plan out to consultation, and it's a local plan. Many of us are deeply uncomfortable about some of those housing allocations. We've got one village, we're trebling the size of the village. And that's a very uncomfortable position to be in. But the alternative to having a plan that we are uncomfortable with is no plan. And what that does, it hands over control of where new housing estates are developed from the council. We haven't got anything like as much control as we used to have, over to a combination of developers and the government. The government have set a house building target of 1.5 million before the next election. That's why Colchester has got a 40% increase in its house building target, and it's been made legally compulsory. We've had a whole series of changes to the planning law. So, for example, I've got one here, end of March. Any proposed development of 150 foot or more houses, if a council is likely to refuse planning permission, not even it has refused planning permission, it's likely to, it has to refer it to the Secretary of State, Angela Rayner. So she can decide whether she wants to make the decision herself. With the smaller developments, we still have that government house building target, although it will increase by 20% if we can't demonstrate a 5-year supply of building sites in the local plan. So it would be an extra 20%. What that means is, we might turn down applications, they would go to appeal, the planning inspector will almost certainly grant them until we hit that government house building target plus 20%. Now, at the moment, the local plan has filtered out many of the most unsuitable sites. We had a call for sites at the beginning of the process. There were a lot of sites that officers said they are completely unsuitable. I understand completely that some of those sites that have got allocations, a lot of people feel they are completely unsuitable. But any site would be open to those development. At the moment, we've got a lot of conditions we've managed to put on many of those sites as a local plan committee. Those conditions would disappear. For example, there's got to be sewage works capacity in this site before any construction can start or occupation can start. There's got to be, people have got to be able to register with a GP before planning permission be given. That could be lost. And above all, the local plan enables us to at least try to get some of the infrastructure, roads, sewage, schools, that are necessary, essential for those houses. Without the local plan, we can't do that. So I'm really sorry, but the staying as we are option is just not on the table. And to be fair to the government, they did put that 1.5 million house building target very clearly in their manifesto before the election. But we are where we are, so we are in that difficult situation. So I just ask you to show respect to the officers and to the councillors who've got that incredibly difficult position that we're in tonight. So I'm going to invite our first Have Your Say speaker, which is Sarah Kench, and then after Sarah we are going to have Annette Butterworth. Those two will be backed up together, and then we'll have the opportunity for one of you to ask a question afterwards. Could I just remind people that if you are speaking, the 1 minute afterwards should be a response to officers, not an extra 4th minute of a pre-prepared question. Thank you.
Chair, councillors, I will begin by recognising something important. Your landscape and ecology consultants have responded positively to the concerns that we raised at Regulation 18, and we're grateful for that. Their reviews clearly acknowledge the sensitivity of PP9, the importance of Bullock Wood and Salary Brook Valley, and the ecological risks associated with development at this scale. Crucially, they set out specific evidence-based recommendations to ensure that any development here is genuinely sustainable. However, this work has not been sufficiently translated into the PP9 policy you are now being asked to approve, and lacks clarity of the risks, mitigations and recommendations identified by your consultants. I'd like to share an example of this. They note concern that a 50-metre buffer would be difficult to accommodate with other green infrastructure requirements with 10% open space, but would be feasible with 40% open space, if well designed and laid out. The PP9 policy presented to you today says substantively in excess of 10% must be provided. Essential ecological and hydrological surveys have not been undertaken. The land take required for buffers, nature corridors and suds ponds is unknown. Without that information, the council cannot credibly claim that sufficient land remains for the proposed quantum of 2,000 houses, and that is before you add in the proposed retail space and two-form primary school. The evidence required to demonstrate that PP9 can accommodate 2,000 houses sustainably and in compliance with EN4, ST7 and PP9 is simply not in place. The evidence required to demonstrate, and we strongly urge the Council to adopt the recommendations detailed in these reports, word for word, in order to fully provide strength and clarity to policy PP9. Your own consultants have provided a clear professional steer. It should not be ignored. The same evidential gap exists across infrastructure. Essential junction improvements are unfunded, healthcare capacity deficits remain unresolved, electricity and wastewater constraints have not yet been addressed. Sustainable transport measures have no confirmed programme or funding. These are not peripheral issues, they are fundamental to establishing whether PP9 is deliverable or not. I'd like to also remind you of the issues you faced previously with Middlewick. We understand that the ecology evidence for Middlewick was discounted and as a result of additional requirements imposed by the inspector is now being completely removed. Do you really want to go down the same route again when you present something that has so many unanswered questions? Councillors, we do appreciate that you are under pressure.
Thank you very much. And can I ask Annette Butterworth to come? Annette, you've been here before. You know there'll be a bell after 2 minutes, and then you've got 3 minutes. And then I'm going to ask one of the officers to respond, and then one of you will get the chance to ask a question in relation to that site. Thank you. Annette, could you just turn the mic on? That's
Can you hear me
great.
now?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll start the clock again.
I switched it off. I'm speaking on behalf of Welshwood Park Residents Association regarding PP9. We urge the committee not to approve the inclusion of PP9 as fundamental issues have still not been addressed or resolved. We have reviewed the updated PP9 landscape and ecology assessments, and all consultants, both ours and the council's, agree this part of the Salary Brook Valley is high-value landscape with particular sensitivity to development. All agree that it plays an important role in maintaining physical and visual separation between Colchester and the garden community, avoiding coalescence. The council's consultant states that the garden community will extend to the eastern edge of the Salary Brook Valley, and this place will place pressure on the remaining open land between the two developments. Their report recommends the necessity to maintain undeveloped land there, and it should be as extensive as possible. That remaining open land is largely the land currently allocated within PP9, yet the revised PP9 does not establish a minimum width for that corridor, identify its extent, or specify which land must remain undeveloped to secure that separation. Nor does it expressly identify the Salary Brook Valley as an area for development to be restricted, despite the council's landscape consultant identifying as that this is a more sensitive area and recommending the removal of a development area. We welcome the addendum that reinforces a buffer for Welshwood, which had been left out, but this needs to specify 50 metres, the same as Bullockwood. Welshwood is not simply a local wildlife site, it's an ancient woodland and a local nature reserve. Ancient woodland is recognised by national planning policy as an irreplaceable habitat. Finally, the revised policy introduces a long list of additional requirements and now explicitly states that housing numbers may need to be reduced if these requirements leave less developable land. This is a significant change from Regulation 18 and demonstrates that the Council itself is not confident of the site's capacity. Critical matters are still being deferred to future surveys, and these are not detailed design matters. These are directly affect developable land, housing capacity and numbers and deliverability. As Sarah said, remember Middlewick. The National Planning Policy Framework requires local plans to be justified, effective and consistent with national policy. Without further detailed surveys, we do not believe the committee can be satisfied that PP9 is justified, effective or deliverable.
Thank you, Annette. And I'm going to ask Sandra's Place Strategy Manager to respond to both of those together. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. So I'll take the points as I've noted them and try and cover both as I respond. So in terms of the recommendations from the ecology and landscape reports, they have been considered thoroughly. We consider them to be very useful additional pieces of evidence that have helped inform the policy. The majority of the recommendations have been included in the policy or in other development management policies. It's accepted that word for word they haven't been taken forward exactly across the board. The reason for that is because they have helped identify where additional survey work is necessary and that it will need to inform how best to address the matters that come out of those surveys. It's not unusual for a local plan policy to rely on further evidence to come forward on things like ecology and hydrological surveys, particularly on sites that require master planning. Some of that information is time limited, and also the process of master planning is a requirement in policy. There's quite strict specification as to what that master planning needs to include, which also includes stakeholder engagement with the opportunity to help influence and shape some of the the detail in the design, layout, the nature and role and location of some of the spaces that serve to do a number of things that are set out in the policy, including providing the open space, providing the buffer, providing the safeguards to protect the key environmental areas that are identified that apply across the site. I think the point about infrastructure is still unresolved and unfunded. The updated infrastructure audit delivery plan and has enabled a more detailed identification of infrastructure that we required, and it's acknowledged that some of that infrastructure will be delivered through funding or contributions from the development. Some of it will need to also have funding from other sources. Again, that is common for all local plans in delivering infrastructure, but it does go further in the policy throughout the whole plan in terms of identifying the infrastructure that's needed to support the growth, and an indication of where that funding may be appropriate to contribute in relation to delivering, in relation to support the allocation itself. And then the point around, with all these demands on the site, the ability for it to deliver as many as 2,000 homes. I think it's acknowledged that there is a significant degree of land take that will be required to manage some of the ecological and landscape impacts and the open space and infrastructure that's required. The exact degree of that is, in terms of land take, isn't known at this stage, but I think there's enough evidence that supports and requirements in policy that gives enough confidence that further work can inform the appropriate density for the site, how the various needs, requirements of policy can be accommodated, and provide sufficient flexibility in the number to allow that master planning to do that. All of the numbers in the plan, including this one, refer to approximate numbers to allow the best scheme to be worked up with the information that appropriately comes forward at a later stage. So I think I've probably covered all of the points there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. And either Sarah or Annette, which one of you is... Annette, do you wish to respond?
Yes, I do.
1 minute.
I know that you've got a terrible job to do here, that you've got to find all these homes, but you've settled on the wrong area here. That area is, with all the considerations needed in terms of space, in terms of ecology, it's easier to just leave it alone. I know that you're going to have to therefore find a space for even more homes somewhere else, but that's what I think is the shame, that this is only under pressure to be developed because you can't find or won't find anywhere else. And it's just not acceptable. It's just not acceptable to develop that land, that it's a special area and it should be left alone. That's all we can say, really. And the evidence shows that.
Thank you very much. And could I invite our next speaker, please, which is Bill Marshall. Bill, please come and take a seat. You have 3 minutes. The bell will sound after 2 minutes, and so you need to stop after 3. And please start when you're ready, and the clock will start at that point.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak. I wish to thank and congratulate both officers and committee members for compiling and publishing the comprehensive draft Colchester City Council Emerging Local Plan 2026 to 2041. This was a major exercise compiled over a tight timescale and within narrow timeframes. So we are here at this point of time when the government has laid in place new measures to attempt to fulfil the election pledge to build 1.5 million new homes before the end of the parliamentary period. Now, at least 174 local planning authorities have been able to use AI to complete their individual local plans, and due to the shortages of planning inspectors, PINs will also use AIs to model to rapidly process the submitted local plans from these LPAs. This situation of AI marking AI could lead to conflict. What measures are in place to counter any conflicts that could arise? Last night, Tendring voted its submission local plan 26 to 2043 through to full council committee on the 1st of September. Finally, on page 1502, the last paragraph, there is a what happens if scenario, a very relevant point at this moment in time for this local plan. Committee members should vote to recommend this draft local plan proposal and send it ultimately to PINs without delay and meeting the December 31st target date. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bill. Who is going to respond? James?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the support is absolutely welcomed. You'd expect me to say that. The plan's not been written by AI. We've used it. It's a tool that can help to use certain tasks, but that's as far as it goes. The overwhelming majority of the plan has been written by the fair hands of the people, my colleagues at this table. In terms of how PINs use AI, I think it's highly unlikely that they'll be kind of marking the submission local plans, of which they'll have there'll be numerous by the 31st. But they may use it to summarise documents that for their own purposes, but I can't see that's going to cause any significant conflict. And finally on the page, right at the very, very end, there's a section that sets out the risks effectively in a brief format. I think we'll actually need to update that for the submission to now refer to the 2026 MPPF, but it's very much the kind of risks you set out at the top of this meeting, setting up the reality on the ground if you don't have an adopted local plan. So I think that's it for that. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And Bill, you've got up to a minute to respond if you wish to. You don't have to, but it's your choice.
I would just say the government have put emphasis on building around railway stations. Fox Street, there is a mainline railway line going through to Ipswich from Colchester. On that line are sidings, the original 1842 sidings. That would make a nice little transport hub, new station, park and ride, and all those facilities to serve not only Colchester and the existing residents, but also Fox Street, obviously, a garden community, and any development that comes through from the 2,000 homes that are proposed in that area. That's it.
Thank you very much for that. And I'd like to invite Councillor Graham Barney, who is Chair of Copford and Easthorpe Parish Council, but he's speaking on behalf of a group of 7 parish councils in that rural north area. Thank you. Graham, I think you've been here before. You know the procedure. Bell after 2 minutes, and you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and Councillors. The 7 communities we represent comprise just over 3,500 homes. The plan, if adopted, will more than double, and in some cases triple, that number, with over 3,800 homes to be built in 15 years. Over the last 8 months, as many of your colleagues will know, we've engaged positively with the Council to ensure this degree of change can be accommodated successfully and the impact mitigated for our communities. Engagement has been somewhat limited, one meeting with all 7 and a short meeting with Marks Tay Parish Council on master planning. But over that time we've seen applications submitted for over 1,000 new homes and are told that the Council cannot oppose them on grounds of prematurity and cannot secure S106 agreements. We understand and sympathise with the dilemma the City faces, caught between government targets, an out-of-date local plan and approaching regulatory deadlines. Time is short, but 2 meetings do not represent sufficient engagement. Officers have been hard-working and diligent in assembling and linking all the complex data required, but less successful in forming the data into a deliverable vision for the whole of Colchester and explaining it. We therefore have before us a partly completed jigsaw, but with no picture on the front of the box. We do acknowledge the Council has listened to our concerns and some changes have fortunately been made to better link the need for infrastructure provision to policies. However, there is no specific policy that commits to the level of modal shift and transport investment. In particular, the lack of firm commitment to community infrastructure to secure infrastructure provision, the lack of specific detail in place policies as to what is required by whom, by when, and the absence of any phasing to avoid front-loading all point to the risk the plan will be undeliverable and therefore unsound. Shades of West Tay, perhaps. Nevertheless, we continue to be pragmatic and acknowledge that some plan will be better than no plan. However, if Reg 9 seems to proceed, the Council must commit to further refinement. Using the consultation positively to continue to listen, improve and strengthen the deliverability of the plan. We now understand that the stage may not attract sufficient weight to control the spate of speculative developments. Speaking personally, I have not met or heard from any resident who likes or wants this plan in its existing forms. It will rip the heart out of our rural communities and put additional strain on already struggling infrastructure. It is to be hoped the consultation, responses and continuing work from officers will provide greater clarity and mitigation for what is a plan that I suspect no one, including perhaps many councillors here, want but are being forced into due to government legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. There's a lot of infrastructure. Did you want to respond to that, Karen?
Yes, I can certainly make a start on that in terms of prematurity. The plan gathers weight and can be used in decision making as it progresses through the plan making system. It starts to gather more weight once it's submitted. So prematurity, you're correct, is rarely accepted as a reason for refusal, but it can be used as the plan gets more advanced. There are instances where speculative applications can be refused, and that was illustrated recently at a site in Tiptree. We can also seek infrastructure mitigation through speculative applications, but we don't necessarily have the policy framework to support those requests and to justify asking for contributions or delivery of actual infrastructure on site. We are progressing the community infrastructure levy, but it does have to be based on up-to-date policies in order to test the cost of those policies, really, to make sure that you're not undermining development overall. So I think that was the points on infrastructure. We will continue to engage with the local communities in terms of Marks Day and the master plan. My interpretation of the new National Planning Policy Framework is that the provision for supplementary plans does allow that to cover an area where there's one site or a number of sites that are being allocated. So I think we can progress along that line to give more weight and certainty and involve the local community in that work as well.
Graham, did you want to come back and respond for a minute?
Yes, thanks. It's just a question, really. Given that this plan is going to go out to the consultation in the near future, at what stage will there be sufficient information about CIL for people to make a comment on?
There's a report expected to come to this committee later this year and for consultation to commence early in the new year, with a view to submission and examination next year, so it will effectively almost catch up the local plan.
Thank you, Graham. That's a very pertinent question. We're now going to have Stephen Simons from Fordham, which is going to be via Zoom.
With a view to submission and examination next year, so it will effectively almost catch up the local plan.
Okay, we appear to be in an echo chamber. Pertinent question. We're now going to have, which is going to be via Zoom.
With a view to submission.
Okay, we appear to be in an echo chamber. Question. We're now going to have, which is going to be via Zoom.
With a view to submission.
Hi, can you hear me? Right, can you hear me? See me?
We're now going to have. Okay, this may echo, so I'll make it quick. You've got 3 minutes. A bell will go after 2 minutes, and after 3 minutes you need to stop, but you will have a chance to respond with a question or comment for up to 1 minute after officers have responded. Thank you. Please start when you're ready. Okay, this may echo. I'll make it quick.
Apologies for any echoes, and apologies I can't be there in person either.
2 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Simmons, and I live in Old Fifth Place, immediately adjoining PP33. My home directly backs onto a proposed allocation. I formally objected during the Regulation 18 consultation, and I continue to object to the principle of allocating this land for approximately
But when the officers have responded to you, you get 1 minute if you want to ask a question or quick response. Please start when you're ready.
Chairman, members, thank you. You've heard the wider concerns of the 7 parish councils. I'd like to focus specifically on what the proposed local plan means for Cotford. I care passionately about our village and I'm not opposed to housing. My concern is that development should be at the right places, at the right scale and supported by the evidence. An increased housing requirement explains why more homes are needed, but does it explain why these particular sites are sustainable places to put them? PP 29A and B lie outside Cotford's established settlement boundary. PP 29 alone allocates approximately 300 homes, around a 50% increase in Cotford's existing housing, before PP 29B and C are considered. Cotford's neighbourhood plan was made only in 2023, following consultation, independent examination and referendum, and became part of the statutory development plan. So my first question is, what has materially changed in the evidence since 2023 to justify such a substantial change to that recently established spatial strategy? The detailed landscape evidence raises further questions. Place Services identified fundamental landscape change on PP 29A and erosion of Copford's rural character on PP29B, where it was not supportive on landscape grounds. Yet the sustainability appraisal reduces PP29's landscape effect to negligible once mitigation is assumed. Are members satisfied that reflects the detailed landscape evidence now available? Then there is Pitts Wood. The applicant's evidence identified protected and priority species, including nightingale, great nest-crested newt and badger, alongside significant bat activity. The Council's own Regulation 19 wording acknowledges that additional ecological evidence is still required to determine the buffer necessary to protect Pitts Woods. For me, the principle is simple. The evidence should lead to the conclusion, not the conclusion lead to the evidence. And finally, I ask members to consider the purpose of the neighbourhood plan. If only 3 years after it was made, substantial areas outside its settlement boundary can be allocated for development of this scale, what meaningful influence has that neighbourhood plan had? And what confidence does that give communities in the neighbourhood planning process? Before voting, I simply ask, has the evidence generally demonstrated that PP29A, B and C represent a proportionate and sustainable future for Copford? I simply ask that the evidence, rather than the pressure to meet housing number, lead you to that decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. James.
Thanks very much. In terms of the, I think, kind of the overarching question, what's changed since 2023 to justify such a change in the spatial strategy? In terms of Copford's neighbourhood plan, it's outside the settlement boundary for that. That's very much because the Copford neighbourhood plan was prepared on the adopted local plans. That's our current one that's live currently. That local plan requires review periodically, as do neighbourhood plans, which are prepared as part of and form part of the development plan. In terms of the overarching final question, has evidence demonstrated that allocations in Copford are proportionate and sustainable? The preferred spatial strategy and other evidence has all informed the level of growth across all the settlements in Colchester. Medium settlements, including Copford, are considered capable of accommodating growth appropriate to the size, scale, infrastructure and constraints of the settlement. Officers believe we've got sufficient evidence base collated to inform the local plan and demonstrate that true delivery. The evidence base has informed the policy hooks that you can see in that plan to inform what happens next is, in relation to the detail ultimately. Policy requires the buffer and the size of the buffer to be informed by evidence. So that will be effectively dealt with at planning application stage, and I know that in Copford we have a big planning application in currently. The SA assesses the policy impacts in terms of landscape and identifies there are mitigation measures in the policies. Therefore, the impact on landscape value is reduced, and once again, that is often something we can do with that at planning application stage quite successfully. Thanks very much.
Would you like to respond?
Yeah, if I could. As we know, there are two current outline planning applications, and the information that we get back from them specific applications seems different to the sustainability appraisal for this adopted local plan. So I just don't understand why there would be a difference. The two applications are obviously laser focused, where the local plan is quite broad. So they're telling us two different things.
James, did you want to give a very quick response to that?
Yeah, I'm not sure they are in this instance showing two entirely separate things. I think when you'd expect a planning application to come in, it will come in with the full suite of evidence that's needed to justify precisely that outline permission. It'll have a more detailed outline in terms of the potential site layout to demonstrate that you could successfully integrate that amount of dwellings into the site. And then we have a validation requirement is a long list of various supporting information, for example, landscape visual impact assessments, planning statements, design and access statements, biodiversity net gain, ecology surveys, and all the rest of the other things you'd expect to see at planning application stage, invariably going to be significantly more detailed because it's dealing on a case-by-case basis. So I don't think that they contradict each other. I just think it just gives a whole other level of detail which we expect to see in the DM field. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And can I invite Councillor Dean Daisley, who is Essex County Councillor, which covers the St John's area, PP9. You've heard the rigmarole for everyone else. 2 minutes, the bell will go, and then you need to finish after 3. Thank you very much. Off you.
Good evening, Chair, Committee and officers. My comments here are relevant to St John's, Welshwood Park and the wider local community. Many fully understand the pressures local government is under to deliver on the government's housing targets, but frequently our residents do not see or truly understand this. Has the public the right to believe planners are taking due care to implement housing development with good preparation which hopefully delivers good outcomes, preventing subsequent appeals and challenges? Sarah and Annette have highlighted some of the gaps in the plan to deliver 2,000 new homes in the land designated PP9. I want to amplify other concerns by the local community. The number one concern amongst residents is traffic congestion because it impacts on all residents. St John's Road daily already experiences queues of traffic backed up from the Rovers Tie roundabout. Itsford Road regularly has traffic queuing between the Ardley Road and the Waitrose roundabouts. Harwich Road remains congested with traffic volumes from both Grinstead Estate and the new estate beyond Longridge Park turning. This ignores the impact of the 7,500 new homes projected from the Garden City and the PP9 plan for 2,000 new homes. Clearly, there is a need for traffic mitigation. Congestion with its resultant air noise pollution levels is acknowledged as being high and can only increase. Homes exiting onto pavements suffer even greater issues of such pollution. There is currently no safe cycle route from St John's, Parsons Heath and Harwich Roads, where single-lane roads are sometimes combined with universal road parking. Additional bus services would not mitigate journeys to work, school runs, shopping trips and visits to the local doctor's surgeries, accomplished with private cars. What about the funding for such bus services? The significant population of elderly and disabled residents using Parsons Heath and Highwood surgeries means primary health care is already deficient without 2,000 extra homes. To be confirmed is not the funding answer. Colchester Hospital has existing capacity pressures without the additional population created by the PP9 plan. A proposed school at the PP9 location would limit the number of houses being built. Who is paying for it? If it's not built, would existing schools have spare capacity? I also include secondary schools in this question. Will 2,000 new homes tax existing local electricity capacity and the capacity of Colchester Water Recycling Centre? Have any mitigating funds needs been identified? At Essex County Council, we must offer clear and concise reasoning for any objections as the Highway Authority. Such objections should carry weight in any resulting appeal hearing. Do planners believe that they are always right and everyone else is wrong? Can planners operate without accountability and the need to adequately respond to the documented proof supplied? Sadly, these 2,000 homes cannot rely on existing infrastructure when substantial new or improved infrastructure is required. Councillors, let's not breach your duty to residents by moving forward an unsound plan.
Karen, that's clearly an infrastructure question. Over to you.
Thank you. There is a great deal of evidence underpinning the plan, and part of that is the infrastructure delivery report and also the transport work which has been undertaken by officers at the County Council. It does assess the impact of the development set out in policy PP9, as well as the garden community and other developments in the area, both residential and commercial. And it looks at the impact of those on the capacity of existing road infrastructure and the impact on congestion and movement. The policy does require improvements at various junctions, including the Parsons Heath, St John's Junction, Bromley Road, Parsons Heath Junction, Ipswich Road, Sevils Lane Junction. There's also improvements to walking and cycling and the bus services that you referred to. All this sort of thing, along with a new primary school within the site, and improvements to the local GP surgery, and both informal and formal open space will be required to be provided, and either provided directly on site in the case of the school and open space, or through financial contributions from developers. That also applies to some of the electricity and the water constraints that you mentioned. These utilities will have to be addressed, but the utility companies themselves also have some responsibility into funding some of that infrastructure. Thank you.
And you have 1 minute if you wish to respond to that.
Councillors, officers, you've been elected by your residents to represent their interests. This plan, from the speeches you've heard tonight already, clearly shows there is significant concern. So I urge you to consider that this plan is unsound. And also, might I just say this, we are being pressured, or you are being pressurised by central government to pursue this plan, but who knows? I mean, this government promised that they'd stop the boats, they clearly haven't. Maybe they won't build the housing that they suggest that you take on board.
Okay, can I just stop you at this point, please? Because the local plan only discusses the local plan issues, not national issues, and we are a cross-party group and we do not have party lines on the local plan.
Okay,
Thank
I
you
understand that and I apologise.
And could I have Councillor John Acker from West Mersey Town Council, please? John, you've been here many times, you know exactly what to do.
Good evening, Chair, and thank you. West Mersey appreciates the opportunity to address the committee. I think it's very important tonight that we look seriously at the evidence underpinning this plan. I take very fully, Chair, what you said by the way of introduction, but the committee has an important decision to make tonight, and it must rely on the evidence before it. On Monday, we sent the committee members and officers a detailed statement setting out serious concerns regarding the evidence base supporting the submission of the draft Colchester local plan. This evening, we wish again to focus specifically, though there are other issues which we could raise, on the adequacy of a very important matter affecting the local environment. That's the adequacy of the evidence relating to wastewater infrastructure and the Blackwater, Crouch and Roach and Cone Marine Conservation Zone, known as MCZ, a statutory environmental designation with legally binding conservation objectives. This is of immense local importance and significance. It is a rare designation. Given the content of this submission of the draft local plan, we respectfully request evidence, and I stress evidence, responses to the following 5 matters. 1. Evidence demonstrating that the 300 home allocation will not hinder the achievement of NCZ conservation objectives. The plan, in our view, must demonstrate the evidence. 2, where is the existing sanitary survey, water quality and native oyster and restoration evidence? 3, where is there evidence about cumulative effects on current developments? 4, evidence demonstrating the wastewater pipe infrastructure required by the allocation is funded and deliverable. And lastly, what evidence did the Council obtain which answered Natural England's request for demonstrating no effect? These go directly to the protection of a nationally and internationally important marine environment. They are not peripheral issues, they are fundamental. Whilst we do support the need for a local plan, this has to be based on evidential basis, and we ask for the evidence to be put forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Sandra, can we have a brief response on that marine conservation zone?
Yeah, certainly. Our view is that the marine conservation zone requirements that are required as a statutory designation have been considered in the plan. The areas designated on the policies map and shown as a constraint has been considered within the scope of the sustainability appraisal and the habitats regulation assessment and all the assessment that goes with that. There's also reference to the South East Marine Management Plan, which is the plan that defines the marine management zone. There's policy reference included in the plan in relation to the need to avoid and manage impacts and ensure mitigation is included in respect of the zone. Specifically in the new proposed Islands Policy LC3, which has been added since Regulation 18 and takes forward some of the considerations and the points raised in respect of the Marine Management Zone, Conservation Zone, sorry. I think just in relation to a couple of other points, in respect of the water quality issue, I think the Anglian Water Services Drainage and Wastewater Management Plan identifies sustainable drainage solutions and the requirement for the drainage network to remove surface water and solutions required to ensure sufficient sewer network connectivity capacity, as well as manage water quality and connected to bathing water and shellfish water. I think it's important also to acknowledge that some of the additional sensitivity controls that might be associated with the conservation zone are for other organisations like the Environment Agency as a regulatory authority. And the local plan can only go so far in considering the constraint in the same way as it does any other constraints. And through the sustainability appraisal, the habitats regulation assessment, the water cycle study, I think our suggestion is that the adequate consideration has been given under the obligation that we're required to follow. And finally, the Marine Management Organisation, Natural England and Environment Agency are all statutory consultees, have been consulted and will continue to be consulted. So if there are any issues raised that need to be addressed, then we can continue to do so through the plan-making process.
John, I'm sure you do want to come back. You've got 1 minute.
Could I ask Sandra in relation to the position on Natural England? As I understand it, they asked the council for a declaration that there was no effect as a result of the policy on MCZ in relation to this allocation. Has there been an answer to Natural England? And if so, is that contained in the submission under Regulation 19?
Sandra, quick response, please.
I'm not sure I can give a yes or no answer. I think through all of what I've just described and the engagement with Natural England that has been undertaken in considering representations, but we can confirm categorically outside of the meeting if that's okay. But we don't believe it impacts in any way on the in relation to the consideration of that issue in the plan.
Okay, so the Constitution does allow a written response to be given subsequently, so perhaps we could do that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Councillor Paul Armstrong, who is Chair of Langham Parish Council. And Paul, you've been here before as well. Welcome back. And as before, the bell will go after 2 minutes, and you've got 3 minutes in total, and the opportunity for up to a minute to respond after.
Good evening, everyone.
As the Chairman said, I've rehearsed arguments about the unsoundness of the Langham allocation at a number of these meetings going back to, I think, February 2025. You've also listened to 311 representations about the Langham allocation at the Reg 18 stage, and it's made precious little difference to the Reg 19 proposal, so you'll probably be pleased to hear that I don't propose to repeat any of the previous sort of points that we've made over the last 18 months. What I would like to say tonight to start is that the briefing material for this meeting, which comprises about 3,600 new pages, was made public on average about 1 week before this meeting. That is simply not an acceptable basis for all of you as councillors to be able to properly assimilate it and make a well-informed decision tonight. Personally, I've managed to skim read about half of those 3,600 pages and more carefully read about 10% of them. And what I've chosen to focus on primarily are the house building targets, the water supply, the wastewater provision, and environmental protection. So having read those pages carefully, there are a significant number of irreconcilable contradictions between various policy wordings across those areas. And I've reached a very firm conclusion in my own mind that this Reg 19 plan, as proposed, cannot succeed in meeting both your house building targets on the one hand and your legal environmental protection obligations, picking up a bit on the previous speaker. And the two late addendums to policies NZ3 and PP37, which were published only yesterday, do absolutely nothing to alter that conclusion. In fact, they make the situation worse. So there's no time in my 3 minutes to explain the logic behind that conclusion, but it's based on detailed analysis backed up by expert legal advice that we've been taking in the background. So if this plan is approved for public consultation tonight, Langham Parish Council will, of course, respond as requested to the Reg 19 consultation, focusing on why the plan is neither sound nor legally compliant. But in parallel, we will kickstart a fundraising campaign to support a judicial review should the plan nonetheless proceed to adoption. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Okay, so the points that Councillor Armstrong are making are sort of higher level points. I'm going to pass over to Head of Planning, James Ryan.
Thank you very much, Chair. We absolutely understand the points people are making, particularly those from Langham. We know the strength of feeling in that respect, and we empathise absolutely. As the Chair said at the start of the meeting, we have some really difficult decisions to make tonight. That's just a matter of fact, unfortunately. And following that, we note the concerns regarding the volume of information that's been provided. We've had to publish these papers within really tight timeframes and based on the completion of the supporting evidence, which our officers were waiting for against those, and the consultants were given very tight deadlines to turn those around, and that is entirely because of using the legacy system that we are using, which is the one that's before us, and if we don't use, we'll have to go to the new system, which, as you said at the start of the meeting, has a whole other time frame. We've made really good efforts to make sure there are no inconsistencies or inaccuracies, but part of the Reg 19 consultation is for you to tell us about those if you find them. We love to be advised of that, so please do, and we can consider those, and if there are inconsistencies that need to be corrected, we'll correct them. It's a balance, but the evidence is considered to support the ability of the plan for balanced growth against all those environmental concerns that have been mentioned. The policies seek to ensure adequate management and mitigation, to ensure appropriate safeguards and deliver the infrastructure that supports the growth. For example, in Langham, if you see the policy, it's detailed, it's wordy, and it has a number of requirements. If we don't have a plan, we may still end up with a Langham allocation being submitted, but without those safeguards in place. And a scheme of that kind of size, without those guardrails, we'll just have to comply with our out-of-date plan, and the new MPPF, which does not have the kind of requirements that sit in that policy. So that's where we are. As we've said before, this is to go to consultation, so we welcome Langham's submission. We don't want a plan that's unsound, and we don't want a plan that's legally left wanting either. So we look forward to those representations. Thanks very much.
And Paul, over to you.
So I think I'd like to pull back a bit and say, I think the question you'll be looking at tonight is a poor local plan really better than a delayed local plan? Elsewhere in Essex, Basildon haven't approved a new local plan since 1998, and it's taken 28 years for central government to finally crack down and take over their planning powers in July this year. Castle Point was threatened with central government intervention 9 years ago. They finally submitted a local plan for inspection in January this year, prior to punitive action. I mean, to my mind, the purpose of a local plan is surely to make things better than relying solely on national planning policy. This plan feels to me so poor that I fail to see whether it adds much real value, whilst it's clearly presaging a slew of major problems facing Colchester in the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. James, do you want to just quickly address that? Is it even possible to delay issue?
No, we suggest that a delay is not possible. It's go to consultation towards the end of this week, early next week, or we will not be able to continue on using the legacy system. We really don't want to be those two authorities that you mentioned. They have had real difficulty throughout recent years in terms of speculative development, release of greenbelt land. They're both greenbelt authorities, and I don't think their residents are happy with how they're getting on either. We're different because we are generally more spacious and we don't have the protection of the greenbelt, and we are potentially even more prone than they to speculative development. We've been really good at resisting that so far because our land supply has been above 5 years, but as it currently isn't, we are looking at a whole new world, unfortunately, and that's why we should go to Reg 19 consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we were going to go at this point to Stephen Simons from Fordham on Zoom. Unfortunately, I've been informed that we have not resolved that technical issue. So what I'm going to do is to ask Madeline, one of our officers, to read out the things that Stephen was going to say. I do apologise to you, Stephen, for that. I hope you can hear this online. Madeline.
I live on the existing development immediately adjoining PP33, with my home directly backing onto the proposed allocation. I formally objected during the Regulation 18 consultation and continue to object to the principle of allocating this land for approximately 25 homes. I do not believe PP33 represents an appropriate or sustainable extension to Fordham. The development would expand the village into the countryside, place additional pressure on constrained rural roads and local infrastructure, and directly affect the character and amenity of existing homes. There also remain significant unresolved issues which should prevent PP33 from progressing in its current form. The Council has not demonstrated that PP33 is genuinely available and deliverable for housing within the plan period. PP33 has no planning permission and no firm delivery timetable is identified within the published policy. The site should not be retained without clear and current evidence of its availability and deliverability. The previous requirement for safe pedestrian connections to existing footways and public rights-of-way has been removed, despite the limited pedestrian infrastructure on Plumbers Road. The previous requirement for appropriate hedgerow or woodland screening around the site boundaries has also been removed, weakening the protection afforded to existing residents and the rural landscape. The proposed vehicle access would pass through the existing development, but it has not been clearly demonstrated that this arrangement is safe, suitable and deliverable. Concerns remain regarding the cumulative effects on Plumbers Road, drainage, utilities and local services, particularly given Fordham's limited facilities and the existing constraints of the surrounding rural road network. I respectfully ask the committee not to approve PP 33 for Regulation 19 publication in its current form. The allocation should be removed or deferred until its availability and the outstanding access, pedestrian safety and infrastructure issues have been properly resolved. If the committee nevertheless retains PP 33, the specific pedestrian connectivity and boundary screening requirements should be restored and strengthened before consultation.
Sandra.
I'll just make a couple of comments on some of those detailed points. Firstly, no evidence has been provided which suggests the site's not available or deliverable, and all the site promoters have been contacted as part of the work to inform the plan. Note the comments regarding the requirements that have been removed from the policy since Regulation 18. That's correct, but they're still in the plan. There are, at the beginning, the introduction to place policies in the plan at paragraph 12.2. There's a long explanation of all of the standard generic requirements that will apply to all allocations where they're relevant, and the matters that are referred to do with safe and sustainable access and connections to existing footways and protection of hedgerows, are all either covered by other policies, but nothing additionally specific. That was a move to try and reduce duplication. That was a comment we got quite frequently that appeared in the plan by saying things in development management policies and then saying them again without anything additional in the place policies. So those requirements remain there for that allocation and all the allocations, but they're not in the place policy, just to make that clear. And then finally, on cumulative impacts, part of the work and the evidence, and including the sustainability appraisal, does take into account cumulative impacts of planned and committed developments. So those will have been considered as part of the assessment.
Right, thank you, and I do apologise once again to Stephen Simons that we weren't able to hear you in person, or at least not without being in duplicate. We have got 10 councillors who have asked to speak. Now, I am extremely conscious of the time, and we do need to have as much time as possible for councillor debate. So I'm going to, with councillors' consent, ask for two things. First of all, you are entitled to 5 minutes. If you could keep it to 3, that would be helpful, but that is at your discretion, obviously. Secondly, I'm going to ask officers to make notes as you speak and then to respond collectively at the end. We did actually have a point of order in a previous local plan where a visiting councillor raised the point that councillors don't actually have a right to a second extra minute. But you have got potentially 5. If you can do it less, that would be extremely helpful. And our first speaker is Councillor Catherine Spindler.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, officers and councillors, for taking the time to listen. I'm here tonight to voice the thoughts of previous councillors Mike Hogg, Helen Chow in St John's, following are my concerns working with Paul Smith and Natalie Summers. I needed to know more history for consideration. Mike Hogg's statement is as follows. Having stood down due to ill health some 3 years ago, I handed my responsibility to successor Catherine Spindler, which includes responsibility of issues taking in the Avelina estate, Bullock Wood, and the fields across Avena into Welshwood Park. Over the last 10 years or so, developers have shown an interest in developing the farmland for housing with the backdrop of rumour and speculation. A group openly admitted their intentions to open up Bullockwood for recreational use. Some 8 years ago, Councillor Paul Smith, leader of the council, as was then myself, met with the Persimmons housing developer, who openly stated their intentions to develop the land for Bullockwood to Welshwood Park. They, of course, were supportive of any attempt of the individual or groups pursuing an agenda that would lead eventually to an open public access through and around Bullockwood. The fear has always been that a change of ownership will lead from dog walkers to track bikes onto scramble bikes and beyond. Paul and myself made our position very clear that we would, as a group, oppose to anything that would lead to opening up the land for development. The developer listened politely to our concerns, but made a very telling remark saying, "No problem, councillors, we can wait." And of course, they were right. I have stated at 3 to 4 full council meetings that residents need to be aware of long-term aim of the developers and how all of this fits into local plan. Paul and myself, including the late Alderman Ray Gramble, continually had pointed out the various obvious that should be developed going forward. This open for land will go forever, along with leaving attended traffic and also infrastructure changes. Can I also add that, as with the county councillor speaking here, and you suggesting that Parsons Heath could possibly be improved, the doctor's surgery, there is no new room for improvement. The car park is so small and the area is so small. I don't see that's how going to be possible.
Thank you, Catherine, for keeping that as brief as possible. That's appreciated. Could we have Councillor Dave Harris, please? Dave, you're an old-timer. Off you go.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing speakers, not just myself, but for all the people here tonight who want to have their say, and I'm glad that you're listening to them, and I think we should continue to do that. On to a few points I wanted to make, and some questions along the way, but I will keep it brief, Mr. Chair. First, the local plan is waiting for Regulation 19. I know that senior officers are urging you, as you said earlier on, to adopt this plan to ensure that we in culture control our housing plans. Now, it's a balance of who wants to sell land and where infrastructure is or is not to be provided by developers at future date to create the features that enable growth. Is it a fact, Mr. Chair, that speculative development will occur along the way if this plan is not adopted at Regulation 19? Second, all the sites in the local plan are on the list as owners are wanting to build on their land. But that is only possible by ensuring existing infrastructure can cope. I know, and I'm sure that everyone in this room knows, that there is a large amount of money that will come to Colchester when the housing is built, both in developers funding and, of course, government grants. Third, policies are in the documents, and that's quite a large document there I see, to protect us from overdevelopment, where communities, roads, health services, schools, bus services, and all the needs of local people are provided and held. The first question is, will these policies be reviewed as the process continues to ensure that numbers of housing are matched and all the questions that are going to come on Regulation 19 from the people behind me will be taken into account at that review? Then, locally, on a more local basis now, this is very personal, I have a few questions in my area and points to be made over the plan development on Beerchurch Hall Road. That's behind John Ward and Discovery Way, etc. Now, when I was younger and had a lot less wrinkles than I have today, Beerchurch Hall Road was a semi-rural road linking Beerchurch to Shrub End and access roads to east and west. With the new estates around this site over the past 2 decades, this road is now busier and is, in my opinion, reached a limit. Will highways engineers and officers of this council and traffic management experts evaluate what can be done to ensure good flow? I'm asking that we don't just bolt on new plans to this local plan on the back of Discovery Drive, Hawaii Way, John Ward, etc. It needs a green buffer to separate the new existing and new proposed, so it has a green lung for health and well-being, and to ensure communities are not jammed in too tightly. So I ask if considerations on access can be made to the south, east and west to the new proposed numbers you have in the plan, for example, Layer Road, Bamstead Road maybe, to give a community access that is not off Beerchurch Hall Road. Next, and just as important, is the lack of community facilities in Beerchurch and in Shrub End. We have a community hall in our local church, but it's overbooked with events. I see in the documents, and I read with interest, that it's made the case for a need for a new community centre. Let's make sure that happens in the right place sooner rather than later, not at the end of the build when there is risk that it won't happen. Lastly, and very importantly, I don't want to pass this by without mentioning Middlewick. We know that diversity and special scientific sites exist on the site. Can I ask, if this plan gets developed, that Middlewick is removed properly from the site and discussion takes place on its future and future protection? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Now, I'm going by the clock at the back of the room, which tells us it's 7:30. That means we've hit the 90-minute point. We've still got 8 councillors to speak. Now, I am aiming as an absolute minimum. This committee will have at least an hour and a half to debate. Now, that means that we need to be in the committee stage by 8:30. So we are going to take an 8-minute break at this point, which means when the clock I'm looking at on the wall up there says 7:38, we will be restarting, and the next speaker will be Councillor William Sunnoaks from Rural North Ward. That would be great. Thank you very much. And William, you know the no introduction, and when you're ready, the clock will start. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Specs on. Good evening, members of the Planning Committee. I'm addressing you as a councillor who has campaigned on infrastructure first for at least 10 years, and by that we mean infrastructure first, not perhaps coming later afterwards. And that's what I want to talk about. I'm glad I'm not in your shoes this evening. This is a plan which is terrible in so many ways and is likely to embarrass you over the coming months. Residents won't like a 26% increase in population with no real infrastructure delivery plan. And the planning inspector will rip into the evidence base, which is still below the standard we all want. You're probably going to have to let it through, but I urge you to do so, kicking and screaming, and insist on a step change in our approach to infrastructure. We won't get anywhere if we all just nodded along. Here are 3 practical things we have to do before the inspection if we're to avoid another North Essex Garden Communities fiasco. First, we need to sort out the AECOM infrastructure audit. The cost has gone up to 939 million, but no one has interrogated the figures. I know that because they're illegible in the evidence base. We need to understand what is in there and agree on priorities. Did you know that it includes £40 million on an active travel bridge over the A12 and another £112 million on cycle paths? We need to ask ourselves whether all these things are really needed. Second, we need to sort out the viability evidence. Newmark have swung to extreme pessimism, and I can't understand what has motivated them to do that. They've suddenly declared that most of our big strategic sites are unviable, and although they claw some of it back later, they fundamentally undermine our plan. Marks Tay, for example, has gone from a surplus of 33 million to a total deficit of 83 million. Such nonsense materially damages the Council's credibility and ability to raise infrastructure funding. Finally, we need to bring the AECOM and Newmark work together into an infrastructure budget. It won't balance, but it will lead us towards a community infrastructure levy, and it will make clear to central government that it will have to fund the big things, the roads and the hospitals, if the housing is to be delivered. Central government simply can't continue sending our business rates up north while dumping housing on us. This work can be done quite quickly from the evidence we already have, but compromises will be needed. We need a sharp analytical focus and the political will to address the problems. I feel it would be helpful to have a small cross-party group of councillors tasked with proposing improvements to the evidence base before the inspection. So here is my question. Is that something you would consider? And how can we keep it focused on the economics rather than the politics? Do you agree that it would improve understanding of the challenges and build bridges between political groups and our officers on a difficult subject? Thank you.
And my apologies, I should have warned Councillor Osborne that she was going to come next. And after Councillor Osborne, we will have Councillor Andrew Ellis. So, Claire, if you'd like to come up, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening all. I want to raise some concerns specifically around Beerchurch Hall Road. This is an area that connects Beerchurch and Shrub End, so decisions made through the local plan will have a direct impact on residents across both wards. There are 2 areas in particular that I believe we need to get right: access and traffic, and ensuring there is meaningful green space between existing and proposed development. Beerchurch Hall Road and the surrounding roads already carry significant traffic. We need to ensure that new development does not simply funnel even more vehicles onto roads that residents already rely on every single day. If development comes forward here, proper consideration needs to be given from the outset to where that access should be. including potentially whether Layer Road or Bounstead Road could provide a more appropriate solution. But equally, we cannot simply transfer the problem elsewhere. Any proposal needs proper traffic modelling, looking at the impact, Layer Road, Bounstead Road and surrounding residential streets. Whichever access option is ultimately chosen, we need to understand where that traffic is going to go. And if additional infrastructure or mitigation is needed, that should be planned for from the beginning, rather than waiting for problems to arise. My second concern is the relationship between the existing development and further development proposed through the local plan. We should not be creating one continuous mass of housing, where one development simply runs into the next. I would strongly support a meaningful green space between the existing estate and any new development. Genuine, usable green space that provides separation, protects the character of the area, and gives residents some breathing space. Good planning isn't just how many homes can be delivered. It is also about infrastructure, access, green space, and the quality of the life of the communities already living there, as well as those who will live there in the future. For Shrub End residents, particularly those around Beerchurch Hall Road and the surrounding areas, these decisions will have a very real impact on their everyday lives. As their ward councillor, I want to make sure their concerns and the impact on our existing communities are properly considered as this local plan progresses. Thank you all.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. And we've got Councillor Andrew Ellis next, who will be followed by Councillor Richard Bourne. And you need no introduction, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, I'm about to say that. Chairman, committee members, as Mayor, I am very conscious of my politically neutral role, and that necessarily tempers what I say tonight. But I remain a ward councillor for these communities, and my colleague, Councillor Kevin Bentley, cannot be here this evening, so I'm speaking on behalf of both of us. We've never argued that Colchester can simply refuse to provide new homes, much as we would like to. The overall housing requirement comes from the government standard methodology. It isn't a number invented here in Colchester. Important to remember that. But where that growth goes and whether the necessary infrastructure comes with it matters enormously. The key test is not whether we can allocate housing numbers on a map. It's whether this plan provides a credible, deliverable framework for infrastructure-led growth. At Marks Day, 2,500 homes would profoundly change the existing community. And we should be under no illusion that 2,500 necessarily represents the end of the story. The plan identifies Marks Tay as a growth area, capable of further development beyond this planned period. That's particularly significant given the government's new planning policy, giving in principle to support to suitable housing within reasonable walking distance of well-connected railway stations. The decisions we make about Marks Tay now could shape it for decades. At Regulation 18, I argued strongly against PP17 and PP18 proceeding piecemeal and called for a comprehensive settlement-wide approach, as did Marks Tay Parish Council and Essex County Council. There has been real progress: a single Marks Tay growth area, comprehensive master planning, a strategic green gap, and much clearer infrastructure requirements. I genuinely welcome that. But the master plan will not start from a blank sheet of paper. The framework plan already establishes the essential spatial distribution to which it must align. I am disappointed that the community has not been more involved in shaping that framework to date. We're already hearing from distressed residents who see decisions being made that could fundamentally alter the place they call home. Their meaningful involvement in the master plan will be essential to its success. That makes it all the more unfortunate if too many of the fundamental choices are constrained before that engagement properly begins. The IADP is particularly important to me. As Cabinet Member for Planning and Housing, I pushed for it because I believe we needed to understand not simply where houses might go, but how the infrastructure they require would be delivered. I'm grateful that my Conservative group and a very vocal councillor, Sunnox, have consistently supported that approach, and our current portfolio holder shares that commitment. Infrastructure-led development should not be a party political issue. The IADP exposes the scale of the challenge, as you've just heard from Councillor Sunnox, 939 million. It isn't a reason to shy away from it, and it's precisely why I wanted it in the first place. And then there's viability, the Achilles heel of the previous strategic plans for Marks Tay. The Council's own assessment found that at full policy compliance, every strategic site tested was unviable. Revised assumptions, and I might question some of those too, improved that to 2 viable, 5 marginal, and 2 still unviable. It doesn't mean they can't be delivered, but it remains a concern that this plan has a great many of its eggs in the strategic site basket. Marks Tay alone provides around 1/5 of all the homes specifically allocated through the plan. Their deliverability, therefore, goes directly to soundness. An examining inspector will require credible evidence that those homes can actually be delivered, with the necessary infrastructure alongside them. Where infrastructure is necessary to make development acceptable, we need clear and enforceable phasing and occupation triggers. A financial contribution is not the same thing as infrastructure being delivered. Important questions remain in Cotford, Laird de la Haye, Birch and Messing as well. But we're not asking this committee to prevent the plan going to Regulation 19. We need an up-to-date local plan. Without one, we become increasingly vulnerable to development by appeal. So send it out to consultation, but listen to that consultation. Test the infrastructure, test the funding, test the viability, and particularly at Marks Tay, listen to the people whose community you are proposing to change so profoundly. Where weaknesses are exposed, resolve them before submission, because your objective should not simply be to submit a local plan by the 31st of December. It should be to submit a sound and deliverable plan that can survive examination and ensure that where growth must happen, the infrastructure our communities need happens with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ellis. Could we have Councillor Richard Bourne, and after him will be Councillor Martin Goss. When you're ready.
Good evening. There's a housing crisis in Colchester and we have to address it. Inadequate housing has severe personal consequences, especially for children. It also leads to higher costs and higher expenditure within the NHS, in social care, in education, in the benefits and welfare systems and more. The plan looks at increasing housing supply over 15 years based on an analysis of those needs. Really, it's not a plan. It's certainly not a plan to deliver new housing with the associated infrastructure. For me, it's a feasibility study. It's something where we should look at things in economic terms in the order of hundreds of millions of pounds. We could decide to refuse to file a compliant plan. The result will be that we will still get the housing, but not the housing that we think we need. And we are even less likely to get the associated infrastructure. Worse, there will be top-down intervention and the political damage of that will be severe. For me, that risk is simply not worthwhile, neither politically nor ethically. We should look more broadly at the economic analysis behind this. More and better housing brings major economic benefits. Better housing reduces those costs I mentioned above in the NHS and other services, probably to the tune of £300 million over the lifetime of the plan. But the major societal benefits of improving that housing can't really be monetarised, but they are great. The additional housing would bring in something like £500 million in additional council tax. I know the discussions about developer contribution continue, but the best estimate we've got at the moment is that that would bring in something like £400 million. But topping all of that is the increase that will be brought about by having more people in employment within the city, which could lead to an economic benefit which people will be likely to estimate to the tune of £1 billion over the term. Of course, there are infrastructure costs, and I understand the debate on that continues. But on any objective economic analysis, the benefits greatly exceed the cost of infrastructure. Feasibility is demonstrated in economic terms. It doesn't guarantee us we'll get the infrastructure. But of course the city should lobby and campaign to try and ensure that it does get the additional infrastructure required to meet the additional housing. But without a local plan, that task actually becomes more difficult. Of course, this isn't all about economics, and I can sympathise, of course I can, with many of the criticisms and reservations I've heard about the plan. But having a plan is better than not having a plan. The downside risks and the loss of benefits are just too great. And I would like to go back to the need for more housing, especially more affordable housing, as the most important part of the plans to reduce homelessness and to ensure that everyone in the city can live in decent accommodation. We should commit to doing all we can to mitigate the real issues that more housing will bring. We need to review the plans and adapt, and when we can challenge, use imagination, try for better answers. I don't dispute any of that. It's an ongoing process. But not increasing the housing supply and refusing to have a plan is the worst option of all. We need to make real progress, because for me there are far too many people in the city who are in need, and we are failing them.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bourne. And we will have Councillor Goss, after which we'll have a statement read on behalf of Councillor Barber, and then I'll call Councillor Naylor. Councillor Goss, you know exactly what you're doing.
I'm glad you recognise that. I was chair of the local plan for probably about 10 years, and I've seen 2 local plans through this authority. So I know the importance of having a legal local plan to protect us from speculative development. I've also campaigned against thousands of houses being built in my part of Colchester many years ago, so I understand this process inside out. However, I think this is probably the worst local plan I've ever seen, and that isn't the fault of the professionalism of our officers, it's because we're running out of places to build that are actually worth building on, and I'm going to call some of that out tonight. Baker's Lane. I was here in this building when we won against Gladman's, who put in a speculative development off Baker's Lane for 150 houses. And a bad site is a bad site, and the planning inspector found in our favour quite comfortably, and yet it's back in for slightly less houses. It doesn't change anything. North Station car park, I think this is probably the worst and most heinous site that's in the local plan. We plan to build on a car park for our rail station. Where the hell are people supposed to park if they come to Colchester to use a rail station, and we're going to put 200 flats on it? The car park has already lost the decked car park due to concrete cancer, and it's not going to be replaced. It is absolutely ludicrous, and the site is still included. You can't get in and out of the car park as it is, and all the traffic backs up onto North Station now because all the disabled spaces have been moved. Beerchurch Hall Road, 800 houses going on Grade 2 listed agricultural land. Again, we are now in a climate crisis, a climate emergency. I think this summer has proved that. We now have a hosepipe ban, and I know that the chair is particularly animated about water. 60% of our food in this country is grown on agricultural land, and if we continue to build on it, then we're going to have even more of a crisis. If you cast your mind back a couple of years ago, when we had no lettuces or tomatoes in our shops, That's because we rely on importing them. Other countries are not going to care less about the UK and its food supply because they will take care of their own countries first. That's been proven. And then the most heinous thing I think about infrastructure that's been mentioned tonight is the A12 and A120 that no one else, of course, has mentioned. And that is the worst thing that this government has done by stopping either of those projects, and they have no plans to restart them. And yet we're expected to take a record amount of houses but no infrastructure. All we're doing is fiddling around the edges. The only infrastructure we're getting is for the garden community, which was already taken care of. So overall, this is a really weak and wobbly and awful local plan, but that is not the fault of officers. It's the fault of government by cranking up housing numbers and expecting the impossible out of a hat. And of course, Bullock Wood has now finally come forwards, which obviously has been flirted with for many, many years, but never made it into the plan. And again, because there's nowhere else to build, these sites are lobbed in. So imagine what the next local plan will look like, because some of these sites will go forwards. And be under no illusion, I'm not asking you not to put the plan out for consultation, you have to. Right? I'm under no illusion, but I'm putting the marker down to say that the local plans are getting worse and worse because we haven't got anywhere else to build. So I'm not advocating you withdraw it. And anybody that turns up here thinking that you can take certain policies or sites out are in cloud cuckoo land. It's either everything out for consultation or you put nothing out for consultation and you leave yourselves open to speculative development, which will happen. And it's already happening. So it's making the best of a bad job, and I don't envy your decision tonight, but I would applaud you to put it out, but absolutely make sure that everybody puts representations in for the next consultation so they end up at the public consultation for the inspector to make that decision.
Thank you. A very important point at the end there. Could we have the statement for Councillor Barber, and then after that we'll have Councillor Naylor. Thank you.
Thank you, committee, and apologies I cannot be with you this evening. I know from experience of being a member of the committee when we voted on whether to submit the plan to Regulation 19 consultation in the last plan, how difficult a decision this is. The change in government legislation with a significant increase in housing numbers imposed on our borough make this challenge all the more daunting. My big concern remains the lack of infrastructure proposals in the plan, which I believe risks this plan being undermined at inspection for not being viable to deliver. If we do not address these flaws now, we risk being in an even worse position down the line, either by development without suitable infrastructure or a plan thrown out for being deficient for reasons that no doubt you will debate tonight. In the last plan, warnings on West Hayes deficiencies were not heeded, and the inspector then threw them out. I urge you to ensure that when you vote, it's on the basis of infrastructure first, so we have a plan that delivers good quality and affordable housing, is sympathetic to existing communities, and addresses the yawning infrastructure gap we have.
Thank you very much. Councillor Naylor. And after Councillor Naylor, we will have Councillor David King.
Good evening, everybody. Residents and many councillors here tonight make good and compelling points that sense and reason says ought to sway the outcome of tonight's vote. This process ought to be a shining example of local decision-making of the kind that the Labour government claims it wants to see. In reality, those who've been closely involved have come to realise the process has been subverted to force only one outcome: an unwanted deluge of 23,000 houses on a small city that can't cope. We still have the legacy infrastructure of a former market town, and we're still ringed with villages like Oldham, 8 Ash Green and West Burgold. Therefore, we're still recognisable from our history as a market town ringed with villages. The allocations that are before you this evening as part of the plan are devastating to the villages. Oldham, 8 Ash Green, West Burgold are some of the villages that I represent. They will be changed beyond recognition. We still have a hospital that is full to the brim, which 2 years ago, the hospital's experts told the same government that it needed 100 million to build 90 beds right away just to cope with all the development that we have had here to date. The evidence shows in total we need 140 new hospital beds at a minimum. Those hospital beds are not just for new residents. All of us will experience a worsening NHS. Those of us who've used it recently will testify that our own relatives spend the vast bulk of their stay in a corridor, because that's where people go when you reach 100%. Labour's health ministers have simply ignored the NHS's own experts. It's reckless, and it's residents that will pay the price. The viability appraisal makes it unlikely that the right level of contributions will result, and that's clear from the briefings that we've all attended and a review of the material that's before you. The issue with the hospital is not the only example of unfunded infrastructure proposals. There's plenty more: roads, schools, GPs. And those who think that the funding will come should look at the evidence. Past behaviour is the best predictor of future behaviour. The A12 widening scheme was cancelled by this government. The A120 dualling was cancelled. We have plenty of evidence of good faith, so we should not trust that the infrastructure will follow. Infrastructure must come first. The government has also imposed a raft of legislation, policies and frameworks that result in one thing. As a city, residents are damned if this is voted through, and we're damned if it isn't. That's the net result. Like others before me, I do not envy the decision you have to make tonight. Whatever that decision is should not reflect on those councillors who are brave enough to sit here and make that decision tonight. We should bear in mind that the Regulation 19 consultation, if that's what follows, must rigorously examine the deliverability of this plan and ensure there is costed plans, committed funding for infrastructure in a proper way. We cannot just hope it will come good. Thank you, committee.
Thank you, Councillor Naylor. And our last councillor speaker is Councillor David King. Please start when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair, Committee. You'll be relieved to get past us and get to your own discussion. Thank you for your patience with members and clearly I know with the public. I'm always sober about the challenge that any committee faces, and I'd like to thank our officers and yourselves for doing what you do on behalf of all of the members of this council as well as our residents. I want to give a personal view, inevitably, but I also want to place a particular weight on one aspect of decision making, which is the relationship that we will have with the new unitary council and the impact and the risks around LGR. You touched on this, Chair, at the beginning. Now, my personal position is simple. It's easy to dislike and there's lots to dislike, but for me, some influence and control is always better than none, much better than decisions made by inspectors and developers. I know many seek improvement and intensely dislike the position that you and we are in. I completely respect that. I can understand where your decisions might go. I have a view about where they should, but this is for you. As you set out, Chair, we move to Reg 19 consultation, or we lose that control, and you've described the timeline that follows. Now, this is a Hobson's choice, I suspect, but you may not, as I said, collectively consider the compounding uncertainty of LGR. Now, we face dissolution in 2028. What we do between now and then forms part of the inheritance for that new council. And having led on this for a period, now alongside the new leader of the council, I can say, we can say, it's going to be a tough gig. Now, we made real progress. We're ahead, many would say, of others, but we're at the foothills of change and challenge as we fuse together 15 councils into, perhaps it'll be 5, who knows, it may yet prove to be 3, or even 4 when ministers make their mind up. I'll wait and see. But what we have to do is use our time as wisely and as well as we can. And up to the end of the year, for me, that's the timeline we've got left. I absolutely understand why everybody would say and have that we should strengthen the case for the local plan, strengthen what we're able to do in support of it. But here's my personal, professional position. Whatever the reservations, go to Reg 19 consultation. In part, because from the LGR perspective, I really worry about what in effect would be an administrative black hole as we are dissolved and the new council is formed. Now, our relationships with our partners, I'm sure none of them are watching, are respectful. They are collegiate. They're based upon knowledge of each other and our patch. We have at the moment what we might want to have to ensure that we can speak up and speak up for and serve the interests of Colchester well. That starts to go next year, and it's gone in 28, when those who succeed us may have 2, but not 3 local plans, will not have the same councillors, the same members, will have wider responsibilities, will have their hands full, may not make Colchester and our planning vacuum a priority, may be tempted to leave Colchester in the slow and vulnerable planning lane. The place where developers would like us to be, I suspect, because it's easier then. Speculative development we talk about, a place where fewer restraints, fewer restrictions, fewer contributions than elsewhere across that new unitary. Simply put, it's a strategic risk to the future of the city. And I ask, however difficult the decision, that you bear this in mind when you take it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. James, there was a very important point about LGR. Am I right in thinking that the other 2 councils, Braintree and Tendring, that we are likely to be merging with, have already voted towards local plans? And any other comments you want to make?
We've heard that Tendring are going to full council very shortly with their Reg 19 plan. and Braintree are still in the process, but all three are on the same track to submit, hopefully, by the end of this year. So we're all in the same position, basically. In terms of LGR, it's obviously echo the comments from Councillor King in terms of the importance of not having a policy vacuum as we feed into the potential SDS that will shape the whole of Essex, potentially, in terms of housing numbers, infrastructure, and commercial land as well. So we're certainly in a stronger position with an adopted plan, because that will feed directly into it, as opposed to not having one where we won't. Thank you.
Thank you. And Karen, there were quite a few infrastructure issues there. Anything you want to say?
Yes, please, Chair. I'll take each one, but providing quite a short response. Hopefully, Councillor Spindler, we noted everything, and I think everything had been addressed in earlier comments to the speakers that we heard. In terms of Beerchurch Hall Road, Councillor Harris and Councillor Osborne made similar comments about access, about a green buffer, about community facilities. We agree with all of the points made, and they will all be important to feed into any master plan and subsequent planning application, reflecting policies in the plan itself. And I'm sure the land promoters will have heard what's been said tonight and will reflect that in any proposals. Councillor Harris also asked, is it likely speculative applications will come forward? And yes, it is very likely, and we will be in a position, planning committee will have to decide those applications, and if they're refused, then they will go to an appeal. And you know, we have got the government committed to delivering 1.5 million new homes, and the possibility of intervention from the county council once a mayor is in place. So we need to be aware of all those things coming down the line. In terms of Middlewick, this plan, as it advances, carries more weight, and the existing plan in which Middlewick is allocated carries less weight. So the more this advances, the better. It also enables us, of course, to start to demonstrate a 5-year supply, which enables us to take a different approach to speculative applications. Councillor Sunnox made 3 suggestions, and we don't always agree, but I think on most of these we are in agreement. And certainly the cross-party group, I think it's a really good idea to look at the matters, the 3 matters that you raised, and happy to set that up in consultation with you, Chair, and take that forward. And I think that might help reassure Councillor Barber in response to his comments, and also partly to Councillor Naylor. Councillor Ellis again also mentioned IDP and viability. I'm confident we will go into the examination with a robust evidence base, informed by that updated infrastructure work, and with the confidence that sites are viable and deliverable, and that they will deliver on the necessary infrastructure. Councillor Bourne, I think it's fair to say you raised things that I have never honestly thought about in relation to new development. Everyone knows about the housing crisis, but I think it's very rare that people consider other implications, not only savings from some of the things you mentioned like the NHS, but also the benefits that come into the city as a result of job creation and indeed council tax. Councillor Goss referred to the difficult situation we're in and specific sites, and I wanted to reassure the committee that certainly North Station, it is a tricky one because we've got the new policy that really pushes development near stations. But what we've sought to do there is ensure the policy requires there to be no loss of car parking. We know it's gone without a significant amount of car parking for a while, but they mustn't lose any more if any of the site is to be developed. And there's some traffic mitigation in the infrastructure audit around the North Station roundabout and surrounding area. I think the development also offers the opportunity to look again at where that disabled parking is and try and improve the approach to the station itself. Councillor Naylor mentioned the hospital, and that, along with the strategic road network, is specifically mentioned in policy ST7, which looks at some of those really key infrastructure items, and they're the items and projects that we will be expecting all new development to contribute towards. We've also heard more this week around the mayoral sill, and I'll send a note around to councillors tomorrow about that. It is intended to operate like it does in London. In London, that's been able to secure infrastructure projects such as the delivery of the Elizabeth line. And Councillor King mentioned LGR, devolution. I think these new powers being given to mayors, the publication of the SDS, which James mentioned, we certainly want to influence that because it's going to be allocating housing to districts. I think we need to be in as strong a position as our neighbouring authorities are. And I mentioned intervention in planning decisions. That could be as soon as we get a mayor and before any SDS is in place. But the requirement is that decisions taken by a mayor should be in line with a local plan where there is one.
Can I just ask you, for the benefit of the public, just to explain what SDS is in a minute?
Yes, apologies. That's a spatial development strategy, which is a county-wide document prepared by a combined county authority or mayoral authority.
And which we will get when we get a Essex mayor. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes before I want to be moving into committee debate. Sandra, anything you want to add? Okay, so in that case, we will move into committee debate. Who would like to speak first? Councillor Dundas. Anyone else? And then I have Councillor Kelly, followed by Councillor Rowe, Councillor Scordis, Councillor Scordis, Councillor...
I think everyone. Saunders.
Sorry, did I say Councillor Saunders? I didn't, my apologies. It's a long evening. And Councillor McLean.
Yeah.
Councillor Paul Smith. That's almost everyone. Egan. Councillor Tim Young. And then Councillor Vanessa Moffat. And that will be everyone. Okay, so Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't expecting to go first, but there we go. I started out with some really small number of notes here, but they've grown as the meeting's gone on, so bear with me. Firstly, I just want to add, I would support a working group. I think that that's quite a good way forward, taking the wider strategic view. And don't worry, I'm going to be parochial and talk about Tiptree in a minute, so don't worry. But I would just like to thank particularly the public and the councillors for their contributions. I think we've had some really well-informed, intelligent contributions this evening. But we are where we are, and I'm not going to pretend I like the plan. And this isn't meant to be a criticism of officers, but I think they've been set what I think might be an impossible task. Fit 11,000 extra houses into a small area, and geographically Colchester is a small area, with no extra infrastructure commitment apart from the money which can be generated from that actual building. And I honestly don't know if that is possible. And as others have said, it really hasn't been helped by major projects such as the A12 and A120 being pulled halfway through, which rather pulled the plug from under many of the original assumptions. And on that subject, I honestly do not believe the modal shifts mentioned are achievable, and I don't think they'll happen. And I agree with Councillor Goss that the building on the station car park is incredibly stupid, because we don't just need the current car parking. As the population increases, we'll need more car parking if we want more people to use the train, which I understood that we did. I have to say, though, there have been some policy improvements since we last looked at this plan. I'm going to talk a little bit about PP19. We've had some very good engagement with officers. I know they've spoken to a number of councillors, and I would like to thank them for that. On PP19, I get why it's not there yet, but we will need more clarity on medical provision. Now, I appreciate that's been left rather vague pending discussions with the NHS and Tiptree Medical Centre, but I want to put it down a marker now. If that's not resolved by the time this goes for submission, then I won't support submission. So I've made that marker. I'm also pleased, I know we're finally getting some engagement with the NHS. I know it's very, very difficult sometimes on these plans that we've struggled to get engagement with the NHS, but a little bit late in the day, but I know there have been some emails from them and they have actually willing to engage. So I think we need to do that very, very rapidly. Now, on the housing numbers, look, the government and the government, I didn't vote for them, but they were elected and they had this in their manifesto. They said that house building would come above all other considerations. So that's what we've got. You know, I'm a Democrat. I have to accept that they have a right to do that. And I've heard some say, I know some say, well, let's just as a council say no to the numbers and tell the government to go do something. Well, let's be honest. I mean, we have thought of that. And if we could, although that wouldn't be to zero, because we do need houses in Colchester. But the reality is the government make the rules. Parliament is sovereign, and no one yet has actually come up with a viable way of telling them otherwise. So we are where we are. Picking up on what Councillor said, Councillor Sunnock spoke about, and Councillor Ellis spoke very well about viability. I am very concerned about the latest viability appraisals, because they could mean that whatever we do with this plan, it could be found unviable at inspection, because it simply doesn't add up. You know, it did happen last time, so we shouldn't think it can't happen again. So all in all, we need some very rapid work in a very short space of time. But we've got to recognise what we're actually deciding tonight. We are not deciding to adopt the local plan. That decision will be made by full council and all 51 councillors sometime next year. So it can still be voted against and still be voted down. But for reasons outlined by officers, in practice, we are deciding whether to continue with the plan or kill it dead. So it is a binary choice this evening. And I get the appeal of killing something you don't like dead. It appeals to me, frankly, because I don't really like it. But we've got to be honest with people what killing it would mean, and it would not be a benign choice where everything nasty goes away. It could and probably be even worse. Now, as I understand it, if we have no plan, it's likely that our numbers will go up 20% because we have no allocation. So when I finish, perhaps some clarification from the officers as to whether that is the case. Now, that's nearly 300 houses a year, okay? That is not insignificant. So it's likely that all the sites in the draft plan would end up with planning permissions being applied for, plus a load more. And also, as far as I'm aware, if we have no plan, we don't have, or it would be very difficult to have a SIL. But perhaps officers could comment on that as well, because I'm not really sure how that works. And of course, we'd have no say over appeals. Now, in my own ward, back in April or May, it seemed like it went on for 2 months, but it didn't. We had a big planning appeal over 165 houses. Now, I won't mention the applicant or the appellant. They began with B and end in law. That's all I'm going to say. But they employed a chap called Christopher Young, KC. Now, he was voted, and I've written it down, #1 planning KC in the UK, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025, and 2026. So my guess he doesn't work for minimum wage. He is the top most expensive planning barrister in the country. And they did that because they knew that winning that appeal would open the floodgates to basically unrestricted development in Colchester. Be under no illusion, Colchester is being targeted, and they will be watching and listening to this meeting this evening. And we won that appeal, even though a lot of people told us, you haven't got any hope. We won it because we had a neighbourhood plan, we had a local plan, and we had an emerging plan. Now, they didn't put emerging plan in the actual decision, but I sat there, and when we spoke about the emerging plan and explained where we were on it, I saw the interest from the inspector and him scribbling it all down and all the details, and then he actually asked for details of where we were with this plan. So I do not think for one moment it did not have an influence on us winning that appeal. And as Councillor King mentioned, now David is a little bit more subtle than I am. Let's be honest, a unitary council. We end up April the 1st, 2028. You've got the West in tendering, local plan with allocations and all these rules you have to do to build houses. You've got tendering in the East, allocations, all these rules with houses. You've got the Wild West in Colchester in the middle. No restrictions at all, no plan. Do we honestly think that a bunch of councillors from Braintree and tendering, their priority is going to be to put a local plan in Colchester, or will they frankly be quite happy to dump all the extra housing in Colchester because they don't get in their backyard? Being cynical, think about what might actually happen there, because we know how it works, okay? And of course, we have no control over policies. So all those things like Tiptree Medical Centre I've just spoken about, they all go out the window. We'd have a bit of Section 106, but we wouldn't be able to stipulate most of those. And we could have planning removed. It's happened in Epping Forest. I know Basildon's a bit of an odd one. It happened in Uttlesford. It is happening a lot around the country. So again, like the plan being refused, do not think it couldn't and wouldn't happen here, because there's a very, very good chance it will. So I'm kind of left, what do? Do I vote for something I don't like? Or do I vote for something which, you know, it might get me a couple of good headlines and I might be a hero for 24 hours because I've voted against this horrible plan. But what I've actually done is thrown every community, my own ward, my own parish council, my neighbourhood plan and my own residents under the bus and condemned them to a worse situation than even a bad plan offers. So I don't think we can kill it this evening for that reason. That doesn't mean I won't keep pushing it to get better. I hope the consultation improves it. We live in hope. And I do so in the knowledge that Council and all councillors will have their opportunity to adopt it or kill it at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. And I'm just very quickly going to ask officers to clarify what point that 20% increase to the house building target kicks in. Could we just very, very quickly?
Yep. If we fail to achieve 85% of the housing target, as measured by the housing delivery test, then 20% is automatically added. So we just had the results published for the last 2 years. We were at 109%, but I need to warn you that last year we delivered 658 dwellings. So 50% of our target. The year before was high, but I think the first quarter of this year, it's always a low delivery period, first quarter, but we were down. So there is a distinct possibility that 20% buffer could be added soon to us. And in terms of SIL, Councillor Dundas asked a question about that. You do need to have up-to-date policies in order to progress a SIL so that those policies can be tested for viability, because SIL can't be introduced if it undermines delivery of a local plan and the policies within it.
So just to clarify that, if we vote down the plan tonight, is SIL still an option or not?
No, it's not.
Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. All right, I've got a few points and I'm going to jump around a little bit, so someone might need to collate my ramblings. I can't type my password in. I've been listening to all the stuff that we've been talking about and trying to bear in mind why we're actually here, as Councillor Dundas has already noted. And it's occurring to me that we are in a pretty impossible situation in that there isn't really an option. It's like, well, you've got to vote for this thing, basically. You don't actually appear to have a choice, which isn't really a very good place to be. So I'm wondering if there are some mitigations that we can come up with now to try and make that situation slightly better. Because it appears that we're going to have to, well, to me it seems like we have to vote for this. And I don't really like that. As in, I don't like the lack of choice, more than anything else. So I've got some questions, and I'm going to kind of loop back. So firstly, I note that the consultation period for Reg 19 is set at a minimum of 6 weeks, but I've seen that other authorities have extended it. So I'd like to know, what is the longest we could use for the consultation period? Not what officers would like it to be, what's the actual longest we could have? And bearing in mind the submission date, how long could we have to and still fit it in? So that was the first thing. The second thing is in terms of advertising it, guidance, assistance for people to engage with it in a similar ways that we got good engagement with Reg 18. I would hope we could get more, even more for Reg 19 than we did for Reg 18. And that the key elements to it are to do with soundness and legality, which is different to Reg 18. And I think people need to understand that, and that needs to be made very clear to people how to structure their arguments and how to structure the responses that they're giving so that they don't just get chucked in the bin. As far as this consultation period goes, I'm being presumptuous here that we've got to vote through, are we able to do work in parallel such that, and I'm going to pick out two things in particular, which is PP9, which is clearly has a lot of interest, and I'm personally not satisfied that the responses there are full enough. And also the other one, which is the Mersey one, and I've forgotten the number of that one, which is the one that had a decent number of representations. Whether or not those two, for example, could be singled out, and there might be others, and I don't want to just pick those in particular, but I'm picking them because they have the most representations, could be identified as being, there is more to come for these. It will come out during that consultation period because we want to take into account some of the information that was picked up during the Reg 18 consultation. We haven't fully assimilated it yet because we don't have time. We've got this extended Reg 19 consultation period. We're going to feed that back in again and try and get somewhere a little bit better. I don't know how possible that is, but I'm just thinking that would be a compromise that we can't vote it down, but there are bits that people are, there's a weight behind that. And then if we have a plan, if there's a timeline of saying, okay, it's a 12-week Reg 19 consultation, we're going to release these particular PP9 and PP23 elements at week 5, week 6 or whatever, and then it gives people an opportunity then to actually read about those things and have some thoughts. So that was those bits there. There's one line which I keep seeing pop up as well in the Appendix D, which, by the way, excellent, really happy to see that there. I'm very, very happy with that. No strategic amendment proposed as the Council must identify sufficient land to meet housing. I get that, that's 100% the case, but it's almost used like a there's nothing we can do here statement. And that might be true, but I don't like to see a door being shut in people's faces in that way. And I think that in places where we've got that line, I'd like to see something a little more done rather than just giving up at that point. And it may be the case that, you know, on second reflection you go, no, there really is nothing you can do there. That's it. But until you try, you don't know. And I think there'd be a lot of people who would appreciate not being just having that door shut in their face. And ST7, I just wanted to clarify on ST7 that the amends, which look good to me, and I thought ST7's new wording looks good. Am I right in the bit? Let me just get it. Where it says in exceptional circumstances. Hang on, where's it gone? I've lost it now. That essentially that a developer can ask for an exemption if they think that there are certain circumstances where they can't deliver all of the infrastructure that they need to deliver for that development, but if it was considered beneficial, that there may be an exemption made. So if you can come back to that question and clarify if that's the case, because that's what I'd been getting at previously, was that it was a poison chalice otherwise and would lead us open to government intervention without, necessarily, because mathematically it was never going to work. And then, as far as this being an unsavoury plan in general, due to just the maths, the space, the geography, and you've got a lot of people who don't want things on their back garden, I'm wondering if there, and I don't see a policy for this, and it wouldn't necessarily be a local plan policy, this would more be a council policy or something, which is for ourselves to impose upon ourselves, not upon developers, which is to spread the bad news, to spread the unhappiness around evenly. So rather than dumping a whole load of unhappiness in one place in one go, we spread it around so that we get everyone is equally unhappy, which is a good thing to be aiming for, I think. So there would be a policy which is, this is the housing allocation we've got. Let's try and distribute that evenly over time so that everyone is equally unhappy over time, rather than spiking that unhappiness in certain areas. And the reason I suggest this is not only because I think it's fair, but also because, and I'm going to bore you with a couple of statistics now. So back in Charter Hall last year, I noted that the fertility rate in the UK was 1.45. We're now, I don't know how much further on than that, a year or so, and the fertility rate has now dropped even further to 1.39. That is actually population crash. According to the ONS, by 2042, there'll be approximately 150,000 more deaths and births per year. This year, 2026, marks a demographic turning point. This is the first year that deaths are now outnumbering births. So we are massively in population decline. And the only reason our population is sustaining at all is because of immigration, and that's actually now plummeted as well this year. That's dropped hugely, and all major parties have policies to reduce it further, which means our population is going to go down quite significantly. With that in mind, and the fact that we're going to have probably 4 different parliaments and therefore potentially 4 different governments during the time frame of this policy, it stands to reason that any one of those new governments or same governments could decide that we don't need as many houses, and then what we've done is we've lumped a load of unhappiness in one place and then we don't do it anywhere else. So it would seem fair to spread that unhappiness evenly in case we don't build them later because we didn't need them because there's not as many people, which statistically there probably won't be, but I'm not a statistician, so don't believe me necessarily. And then the last part was... That was the last part.
I'm looking at the 3 amigos here. Cameron, would you like to kick off on that?
Yeah, I would like to help Councillor Kelly here, but there is absolutely no scope to extend it. The team would lynch me if I was to say even one day, because if we're to meet the deadline, and it's not just me saying this, you've heard from lots of people tonight about the importance of that deadline. The 6 weeks then leads into a really concentrated period of assessing those representations, reporting back to this committee in November, to then submit to the Planning Inspectorate, but we don't submit, we submit for them to provide feedback to us in the form of a checklist, which we then have to comply with before we officially submit at the end of December. So the deadline is as tight as it can possibly be. I don't know how Braintree are going to do it because they're going to committee soon, but you know, it's going to make it even closer. So I don't think there's anything we can do around that, which means we can't amend those two policies that you talked about either. There is scope as a result of the consultation for the planning inspector to amend those policies. So that's not ruled out at this stage. The spreading the unhappiness, I'm not sure there's many people, but maybe Tiptree, Councillor Dundas, they're reasonably content with the plan, but I don't think there's many areas that are, I would say, are happy. So the unhappiness is probably fairly well spread. But maybe the next plan can pick up on that better. And then the population dropping is an interesting one because it reflects an article I read only today actually about falling school places. So, you know, people worried about school places will find that going forward there's actually more school places because the births aren't happening to fill the schools as they have been. So I agree with that. Policy ST7, I was probably jotting down, so perhaps you could just go over that question again, please.
Yeah, let me see if I can find it. Do you want to let me look for it and I'll come back when I've found the bit, because otherwise I'm going to be faffing.
Sandra, I'm just going to ask you, Councillor Kelly did ask about mitigations. We have just agreed some very recently. Could you in 1 minute, because councillors have seen those, members of the public haven't, could you very quickly just summarise what those mitigations just agreed are?
In terms of the addendums? Yeah, sorry, I can, just bear with me quickly. Right, so just to run through a few addendums, a few changes in. There's a series of updates that reflect information on heritage impact assessment that was received after the papers were published, and that's to policy PP10 and PP54. I haven't written down exactly where these all are, so apologies. I can remember some, but not all of them. PP55 and 29C, which is Copford, and 49B, which is in Peldon, and 22B. And then a different amendment, there's to policy PP37 Langham, where there's been a suggested inclusion of criteria that relates to consideration of dark skies and in virtue of its proximity to the Dedham Vale National Landscape. That criteria was in some of the other policies, including Boxted, but was omitted from PP37, and that's also been suggested to be added for PP38. And then also in Langham, sorry, they're on two amendment sheets, right, thank you, is a reference to a requirement in relation to wastewater, which is proposed to be in policy NZ3 to apply generally to add, which is about wastewater management, adding a criteria which I'll just read out, where there is insufficient capacity at the receiving water recycling centre or within the associated sewerage network, development will only be supported when the necessary infrastructure improvements have been demonstrated to be deliverable and will be completed prior to occupation of the development.
Okay, thank you. So basically they've got to be completed before any occupation can take place.
Yes, and
Right.
that reference to that is also added to PP 37. And then finally, I think it was alluded to earlier by Annette Butterworth, a suggested amendment to Policy PP 9 to refer to the use of buffers in relation to Welshwood and Wallswood, which was again omitted from the policy. And then one map amendment, which is again was inadvertently omitted from the maps, which is in showing an employment designation at the former Mill Race Nursery is also added as a into the addendum sheet. I think that's it. Thank you.
Right, thank you. And of course, we've also got the reference to wildfires and designating certain villages as difficult to evacuate. And that does include Mersey. And we are heading... Did you want to come very quickly back before I go to Councillor Rowe?
So the ST7 bit, which I referred to, it's page 47 of Appendix A, which says, where an applicant stroke developer is seeking an exception to this policy later in the plan period, it will only be considered when all of the following criteria are met. Open book viability, proven to public benefit, full and thorough investigation undertaken, obligations are entered into by the developer, blah, 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 that one. Is that the one that allows us, if all of those conditions are met, for a development to go forward, even if it doesn't quite tick all the boxes?
James.
Yes.
Going to move to Councillor Rowe. I'm conscious that we are less than 15 minutes from another 90-minute point, and we've only had 2 councillors speak so far, so could I ask you not to take 10-15 minutes, all subsequent councillors?
Thank you, Chair. I will try. From my perspective, I'd like to ask, are officers genuinely satisfied that this plan is infrastructure-led? Because from my perspective, I don't believe it is. We're being asked to absorb a level of growth without funded upgrades to the A12 or the A120, or as pointed out earlier, a clear programme to additional hospital capacity, which I get spoken about on a regular basis. The projects, in my mind, the Category A projects are still showing uncertain funding, and I'm not clear where the triggers are either. I very much appreciate the addition that we added when we spoke about the Langham P37 earlier, and the addition of the dark skies and for the wastewater recycling. For that, I suppose this sort of rolls into sort of the wider housing trajectory and how infrastructure is sort of is delivered. If essential infrastructure projects are delayed, for example, the wastewater recycling, or any other particular project, what actually happens? I mean, do we delay the building if the funding doesn't materialise? Do we reduce the housing trajectory? Does development automatically slow down? Or do we simply carry on, hope that infrastructure catches up? Because in my experience, that's my biggest worry with all of these plans, and seems to be what we've done in the past. We have just sort of put the houses in and hoped for the best. The infrastructure hasn't appeared, and I'd just like to get a bit more of an understanding as to what assurances can we give to residents that the infrastructure is going to actually materialise. And I think Councillor Sullings sort of pointed on this earlier, and some others pointed around the ACOM £339 million net infrastructure cost. Again, I would like to see sort of a much clearer identification of sort of what are the triggers for each of these, what's the category A, like what's the list of the projects that we believe are, you know, have a credible funding route, or are simply sort of nice to haves and are possible, you know, sort of have like a possible funding list against them. That's sort of my biggest concerns around this plan, around the infrastructure. And I think it's so important that we get this right. And I understand sort of the constraints around it all, but if you could answer some of those questions, I would appreciate it.
Okay. Karen?
Thank you. Yeah, there was quite a lot there. It's really hard for development to be infrastructure-led because developers are only required to mitigate the impact of their development. It's also difficult to plan for them to fund infrastructure up front because A, it might become mothballed and then not used. The funding and revenue, sales values, it's all in the viability pot. And of course, mitigation from that development isn't actually required until the houses are occupied. But there are things that can happen to mitigate if the infrastructure isn't funded. So an example we had in a previous plan was water capacity in Tiptree. The policy was explicitly worded, as several are in this plan, to prevent development coming forward until there was resolution on that issue. And I think we put in the plan that the scheme shouldn't come forward before 2028 because that reflected in the Anglian Water's strategy and funding programme. But an alternative solution did come forward before then, so the development could come forward. So it is a moving feast and we have to keep an eye on that all the time. I wouldn't say we change the housing trajectory, which relates to the whole 15 years, but what we would do is reflect that in the the 5-year housing land supply, which has to be sites that are deliverable and developable, which also means viable. And if they're not deliverable because there isn't infrastructure there, then they shouldn't be in the 5-year supply. So there are measures that can be taken to address that. Yeah, I think that was what I was going to say.
Thank you.
Can I just come back, Chair? Thank you. I know that we say that we can't deliver the infrastructure. I unfortunately sort of look around and as a commuter into London, you go past Bewley Park, for example. There is a lot of development there where they've ultimately put in a station. There's a number of roads there. There are a few housing developers around, but you can pretty much see where they're going to put the housing and where they're going to put things. You know, it seems like, you know, if you do it properly, it can be done. It just seems that Colchester can't, for some reason, do that. And I'm not sort of laying blame or criticism on the officers. I would not let's do that. But I do believe over a long period of time, previous administrations haven't managed this correctly. And I think that's the reason why we are where we are, along with the rather exorbitant targets that we've been set by government. So, thank you.
I'm going to move to Councillor Scordis, and if we get time before the break, Councillor Councillor Saunders. If we don't get time, he'll be straight after the break.
Well, did you want to go to a break at 9 o'clock or 10 past? 10 past. Okay, cool. Try not to carry on too long then. I mean, what we have to remember, first of all, we talked about it a lot, is this is not the final vote. As we know, it's a vote to send this out to consultation. And you did talk about democracy at the start, Chair, and there's an argument that us 12 shouldn't be stalling democracy for the rest of the council, who will have a vote on this, and residents who will be able to feed into the consultation. We saw that Basildon and Castle Point were mentioned as examples we could follow. Well, from what we're seeing from Basildon, if you've ever been there, the layout is terrible. Residents really hate it. They're expecting a 2.5 million bill for appeals that have gone wrong. Similar with Castle Point. And frankly, government doesn't take them seriously. There's a reason Colchester does better in bids like the Town bid and Pride in Place, is because people see Colchester as a serious place. Well, unfortunately, Basildon and Castle Point, government don't, and that's not just what you see on YouTube with the Basildon meetings. Also, active travel came up with Councillor Sunnox, and Councillor Dundas alluded to it. And I guess it's a pertinent question. Should we be spending all this money on a bridge that's for active travel and cycle lanes? But at the same time, we do have to look at what this year has been like and past years with climate change. We do have to look at public health. We've alluded to the effects of the NHS. We also know that active travel will save us millions from people being healthier. And also the people that move to Colchester, lots of them are young families who move out of London to escape that very loud life and come for a quieter life here. And a lot of them will regularly cycle each day. And they'll come to Colchester, and they may do that for a few weeks to the train station, and then they'll realise the infrastructure's not here, it's too dangerous, and they'll do what everyone else does. They'll jump in a car and become part of the traffic. So for me, I think that is something we do need to look at seriously, and it's where we've failed in the past, and not just us, many other cities. Train station parking came up as well. As someone who uses that train station a lot, I can tell you I've never seen it full, I've never seen it near full. That may change, obviously, with more development, but again, you want to promote people of different ways to get there. But also, it may be that Colchester has, I think we have 5 train stations. So if you live where I live, you're near the Hive. If you live in the town centre, Newtown, you're near Colchester Town. And I know Marks Tay gets very busy, and that probably gets more traffic from the villages with that big car park. And I guess a big worry is we could be the only council of the 3 without a local plan, and I think Councillor Dundas highlighted what could happen there, as well as it being slightly embarrassing, being like the naughty child. But I do want to concentrate on the infrastructure first. That, well, I've been a councillor 10 years now, and we've been talking about it for 10 years, and I think Karen kind of highlighted it there, that developers only need to mitigate their development. And we have to be honest about this. There is not a single city or busy town in the whole of Britain that has good infrastructure, where you can get in and out, where they're not struggling for doctors and nurses, where they're not struggling for school places, although London are closing schools because young families are moving out. It's the same everywhere. And part of that is because we still rely on Victorian infrastructure, whether it's our sewage, whether it's our roads, whether it's our train tracks, which are Victorian as well. We are still there, and frankly this is something that does actually need to go higher to any government that's been in. Every government has been putting this on the back burner because it's much easier to rely on the infrastructure that we've had. And we can talk about expanding the A12 and A120, but again this comes back to another theory where if you look at America, where you've seen pictures of LA, they have roads that are 10 lanes wide, 10 lanes. Guess what? They still get congestion. They still get traffic jams because you get the same problem where you're encouraging people to get into cars for small journeys or not use other traffic. So we can have those arguments, and I think they're perfectly reasonable to have. But we as a council should be lobbying any government around this, of how we actually fix this, because it is broken across the country. There's the question of we haven't trained enough doctors, we haven't trained enough nurses, we haven't trained enough teachers to actually fill the schools, the GPs and the hospitals. I think that is a very valid argument. And a lot of us need to change our behaviour of how we get around the country as a whole. So really we've kind of had it laid out for us of what we have here. I personally think Councillor Goss was preaching to the audience with his "it's the worst local plan he's ever seen." I don't think it's terrible, I don't think it's the end of the world. Councillor Bourne has laid out there are significant economic advantages. We know that if we don't have a local plan, it will be much harder as councillors to have a say locally of what we want. I know that if this local plan's approved, I'll be looking at my ward and speaking to the planning team and going, right, 106 money, here's what my ward needs in these areas. If we don't have a plan, I don't know where developers are going to build. And speculative development, we've talked about it, it's here. It's already happened. I was at a planning meeting where Oldham got hit, and then my ward got hit as well, in an area that in the current expiring local plan is protected as a coastal protection belt, and in the new local plan would have been protected as an area of scientific interest. It's now going to have 70 homes on it and an access road that's a bit dodgy. And where we do have to be realistic with residents as well, Chair and everyone here, is that I've been saying to the emails that I've been getting, is that we're voting on the whole plan, we're not voting on bitty bits of it, but we haven't got any planning applications that have come forward. We do not know what the 200 homes around Bullock Wood may look like. We don't know if a developer, or 2,000, yeah, 2,000, sorry, I've limited numbers, but a developer might say that's not viable. They may look at it and go, no, we can't do that, but we'll build however many, and that's the same with any other sites. So we're not even at that stage yet. But what we should be doing is going back to our residents and going, right, here's what may be coming, and what do we actually need for the area, that we can talk to the team about 106 money, SIL money, to make sure we're prepared. But I'll let others speak, or we have a break, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Scordis. And we are at the 90-minute point, so we can have a very short comfort break here. If we can reconvene when the clock on the wall at the back there says 1:15, that will hopefully give chance for other councillors to speak. Councillor Saunders, you are first on. Ask councillors if you can limit yourself to 5 to 6 minutes. Lindsay will be keeping a time, so you would just get a little bit of an indication when you are getting over that, because it is really important that everyone gets to speak. So I apologise for that in advance, but it is really important everyone can speak. So, Councillor Saunders, welcome to the Local Plan Committee. You've recently joined, and please do give us your wisdom.
Well, I don't know about wisdom, but yeah, I'm the baby here. I'll be very quick. I've just got a couple of questions, really. Just related to Mark's Tay, can OA5 be strengthened so that no major development or occupation goes beyond the agreed phases until the necessary infrastructure is fully costed, legally secured and operational? If not, why not? And also, will the Marks Tay master planning process genuinely consider alternative layouts and transport proposals from residents and parish councils, or must it follow the framework that exists already? That's it.
I think Councillor Saunders gets the Chairman's Award for brevity there. Sandra.
I'll take the second point first, and Karen may come in on the first one. The framework that is in the plan is an indicative framework to suggest that a way in which the parameters that the policy itself is suggesting, based on the evidence, could be the growth area could be delivered. So it is purely indicative. So there is some through master planning and further consideration of how that some of the policy objectives may be realised. The development framework is sort of flexible and a degree of fluidity to seek to. So yeah, I think the answer is yes. Short answer. And your first question is whether or not the policy can be strengthened to wait until all the infrastructure is fully funded and costed. I don't know if Karen might be better answering that, but I guess on the basis of what we've been talking about with the prioritisation approach, then that will cover that to some extent. But I don't know if you've got anything to add, Karen.
I think that's right. I think, and hopefully you or a colleague will be involved in the cross-party group looking at the prioritisation and funding of infrastructure, because I think it's recognised development can't fund everything that's on that really long, really tiny font infrastructure list. So we've got to look at other funding as well. And it was interesting, the Bewley Park reference, because when that site was allocated for 3,600 dwellings, there was no certainty about a station. The officers said at the time it would be a nice to have. It's not funded. And it took 20 years to deliver that station and central government funding. So, you know, things do change over the life of a plan, but it's certainly something we can look at through that group.
Councillor Saunders, the possibility, and it's a little bit up in the air still, if there was a cross-party group on infrastructure prioritisation, would you be happy to serve on that? Okay, thank you. So, coming on to Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. I'd like to know what gives officers confidence that essential infrastructure will be delivered within timescale. If essential infrastructure isn't secured during development, does development stop or proceed without the infrastructure, essential infrastructure? And if development finishes without the essential infrastructure, does this prevent occupation? I'm not on the infrastructure first bandwagon. I know the many hard lessons that were learned from California City, which had an infrastructure first approach. If you Google that, it's quite a sight. Really, it has to be simultaneous with the development or come after when the demand is there, is my opinion.
Infrastructure again.
Certainly, applications can be refused if critical infrastructure isn't incorporated within a scheme or funded through a scheme, yes. There's also instances where occupation has been prevented because I think it was Boxted maybe, where the water supply wasn't available. So yeah, there are options to preventing that, but I would say that we're confident that if we allow a scheme, there is the funding available to pay for that critical infrastructure.
And Councillor Paul Smith. And that will be followed by Councillor Hagan.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I first deal with PP9 in my own ward. It was very good that we got the briefing on the documents and the reports that the council had prepared. These ones, as was mentioned in the speakers, suggested that to meet all the requirements, more than tripling, the buffer zone around Bullock Wood, protecting the footpaths, the mature trees and what have you, it would take an open space application of 40%, up from the 10%. That's a third of the site gone. I asked the officers, well, if all this site's gone, how many houses have you reduced it by? And the answer was 0. It's still 2,000, despite losing all that extra land. That is not a viable plan. And that is a reason why, as a ward councillor, I have great difficulty in supporting this proposition. If we've taken out that space, there must be a reduction in the number of houses. And the fact that it's not there means that it's not realistic. Alternatively, we could have put 3,000 houses in there to start with. And given the pressure we're on, if we could have put 3,000 in there, I think we would have done. Turning to the strategic issues, and I should say at this point, I'm not criticising the officers because putting this plan together has been increasingly difficult. The very useful reports we've had over the past couple of weeks have highlighted key problems. The infrastructure, 900 million plus, unfunded from developers. Where's that coming from? The issues that we've got about viability. The chart that showed not any of our sites were viable. Well, hold on. The consultant said we could do a few things. If we take out all the net zero stuff, if we reduce the amount of affordable social housing, the thing which Councillor Bourne and I have passionately fought for last night and on many other occasions, we make it down to maybe 20 to 30%. We might be able to get a few more sites viable. And we came out with 1, or was it 2 sites that were just about viable at that level. And the 2 biggest were not viable, even with all those considerations. Oh, and I forgot, yes, the nice developers were going to reduce their profit margins from 20 to 18% as well to make it viable. That's really not working. And we looked at the transportation one, and we're inquiring a massive modal shift. And we've had comments about how much it's cost to put in cycle routes and what have you. But to get that degree of modal shift, we're going to have to invest a huge amount in infrastructure, and we're coming back to the fact that it's not funded. I'm really struggling as to how this is going to get anywhere near viable when it goes anywhere near an inspector. So that is where I am on this one. Thank you.
Did anyone want to comment on the housing density at PP9?
Yes, thank you. There's 100 hectares involved in the site, which To deliver 2,000 would be a really low density of 20 dwellings per hectare. So to deliver on, with that much of a reduction, allowing for open space, etc., gives 66 hectares, which still only results in 33 dwellings per hectare. So it's quite credible that 2,000 can be built on that site. We always knew there was going to be constraints around bullock wood and things like that. And we do need to remember that several councillors have spoken at this committee and asked for higher densities. And we need to reflect that on some of these sites, especially those that are nearer the urban area. So, yeah, that's the comment on density.
Okay, thank you. So, you want to come back?
Yes. And what's the views of the promoters of the sites on the viabilities of these sites?
The meetings that we've had today are that the sites are deliverable. The planning inspectorate require a template for every site that goes forward in a local plan now, and each site will be accompanied by that template, which sets out questions around deliverability, viability, that sort of thing. Yes.
Okay, Councillor Hagan.
How long have I got? 25 minutes. All right.
You have the advantage that Councillor Saunders has got the Chairman's Brevity Award and went before you. I'll tell you if you're going on and I need to just wind
That's
you up.
fine, Chair. You can do that. That's not a problem. I'm tired anyway. I want to go home. So I've been sort of tallying up the keywords of tonight in my head, and the number one keyword that's won the prize is unfunded. I think that's possibly one of the scariest things that this committee needs to be considering this evening is, although you guys have done a good job with the resources you have, which is pretty much go and deliver these houses because we're government and we're telling you to do this and there's no exception. So we have no choice but to make a decision, but to pursue the plan to the next stage. It's disheartening though because it's not in the best interest of Colchester. And I say that because as a Stanway Ward resident, I've seen the absolute cluster that delivery of those developments in that area have caused in and around that part of Colchester. When you turn around and say, was it master planned? No, it wasn't. So I'm pleased to see Marks Tay coming forward as a master plan site. I'm not pleased to see Marks Tay coming forward at all though, because the inspector has already said in the past it's unsound to deliver it, especially as this Labour government have cancelled the A120 and the A12 widening projects that are so desperately needed in this town. Colchester deserves better. You look at America, yes, they do have traffic. They have also a much bigger population. But the roads they deliver out there, they actually have 2 lanes for a side road. So actually you can park your car on the side, you can overtake cyclists safely, you can all the sorts of things. And some roads even got a middle lane, so you can pull over and you can turn in left, right safely. So they actually think about it a bit more. And most of the time in America, when they commit to something, they actually deliver it. We can't even deliver a link road up around the corner when you're delivering 7,500 houses. I fell upon some historical parish council minutes the other day, and it referenced Section 106 obligation for Stanway, and it's 36 years old. It was never delivered. Call me a cynic, but I don't think the infrastructure is going to come. There's no money, it's unfunded. I don't think there's the will of the developers to deliver it. I think they go in, they deliver the houses, they squish them in, and then they're off, and they're doing the next one. And that brings me to the other concern, is these developers will deliver a project of 400 homes, say, for example, but then the streets never get adopted. So how are they allowed to carry on building out other sites when that site hasn't been adopted? That's not fair on the residents. They're now paying association fees for management fees. They're now looking out of their window and they're seeing scrublands that are not managed. They're seeing their roads are not swept. They're seeing streetlights that aren't working. They don't know who to go to. Us councillors, we're knocking on doors. Well, can we speak to the developer, please? And they go, yeah, it's not a problem. It's with, it's with Essex County Council. They're doing their bit, and we can't do anything else there. You go to neighbourhood services, you go, can you empty the bin? They go, can't do that. It's not adopted. But we'll do it. But we can't keep doing it because it's costing the taxpayer. Remember, all this is taxpayers' money. Yeah, it's not magical money. This is taxpayers' money. So we need to be absolutely certain that the plan that we're going to be putting forward is sound, it is viable, it can be delivered. I think Andrew Ellis said it as well. Will this plan survive inspection? That's important to know. Another positive that I will take away from this, though, is that we are now looking at SIL, because I think that's important moving forward, and it should have been adopted a long time ago in my view, and I think I mentioned that several years back, and I'm glad to see that coming forward. Had SIL not been able to be delivered in the way that this plan is going to help deliver that, I don't think I'd have voted for this to continue. It's because of SIL, and the only way to deliver SIL is to push this plan forward. I think that's probably why I'll vote for it this evening. But I'm not happy with it, really not happy with it. And, you know, to squeeze in those houses over on St John's, I feel, because I'm not hearing of whether you're going to get retail in the area. So where's everyone going to go? They're going to go to Stane Park and then complain about it, or wonder what's going to happen there. It's not Stane Park's problem, you know, that this has happened. It's because there's not choice in this town. This town has exploded in growth. There's not the infrastructure in retail, there's not the infrastructure in employment areas, and when some developer does come along and do that, they get moaned at, complained at, and taken to court. It's shocking, really. This town has now got 4 town centres, and we need to be absolutely determined to deliver the best we can for this town moving forward. So if any of you guys over there, and I thank you for your hard work, and pushing on things like the Warren Lane roundabout that's desperately needed, and it got a small 1-sentence paragraph in the Essex County Council's report. I think that's absolutely shocking. That's been on the cards for over 20 years. But we need to make sure developments that are delivered in those areas, for example, the one that's happening at the bottom of Winstead Road, don't get a if, but, then, maybe, you don't have to deliver the funding because someone else is going to cover the costs. Yeah, we need to fix the problems. We need to fix the core issues this town faces on a day-to-day basis. We are able to do that. This council can do that before it's no longer, and it becomes one big free-for-all across North East Essex. Who knows what it's going to be like? But I'll stand up for my residents in Stanway. They do not want 2,500 homes worth of traffic descending on M&S on a Saturday afternoon getting stuck. They need choice up there. So if you're going to master plan it, do it properly. Yeah? And again, I go back to colleagues in this room who have direct connections to those in government. Get that A12 sorted. Get that A120 sorted. All right? There's money up north for their projects. Let's have some money back down south. It's not about who's the MP for this area, whether it's a Labour-led area, whether it's Conservative or Reform, whoever else wants to put their hat in the ring. It's about doing right for your residents, and I think that we've really got to sort ourselves out in this town, because I heard from Councillor Scordis, Britain is broken. So under your watch, mate, you need to get it sorted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hagan. It's an impassioned speech. Can we have Councillor Timyell? You waited very patiently.
Thank you, Chair. There was a government who had 14 years to sort the A12 and A120 and didn't, of course, so let's not throw accusations around. And I would point out to Councillor Hagan that we're not a town, we are a city, and this city is not broken, and this plan is not a bad or awful plan. I'd agree with Councillor Scordis about that. But I will join Councillor Hagan in thanking the officers, because I don't think many people have done that tonight. You can imagine, well, you probably can't, the thousands of working hours that has gone into getting this plan to this stage. So thank you very much. We've got a very good group of officers working on this local plan and have worked on local plans in the past. And they're doing a great job. So thank you very much for that. What I think you said at the beginning, Chair, still holds good. 4.1 broads out the alternative options, not having a local plan, and you've made very clear where that goes if that doesn't happen, and I don't want to face that. I think 5.15 and 5.16 in the report shows an important message about just because there's objections doesn't mean you remove an allocation. You deal with the objections, you address them, and then you take it forward on that basis. And yeah, I'm glad we have talked about more building on brownfield land and higher density in urban areas, and that's taken into account in 516, and we need to do more of that going forward. I think we've talked about that, Chair, and maybe in the next local plan there'll be more of that coming forward, because I think there's general agreement around the council about that. I think from 5.87 to 5.92 it deals with all the Bullockwood, Welshwood, and we've had a number of representations about that, and it's very powerful. But I think what Karen just said about the size and the hectares, it isn't high density. It could be higher density, but it could fit in. I'm not sure, like Councillor Scottish said, that 2,000 may be too many. We don't know. It'll only when it starts getting developed will we know if that's the right amount or not. I thought the representations from visiting councillors were interesting. I think Councillor Ellis made some excellent points. He always does, and I listened to him because he knows about local plans and about planning and development. But I thought the most interesting, like Karen, I've never heard local plans put in the economic context like Councillor Bourne put it. And the good things, the positive aspects, the economic advantages of new housing, of new jobs coming to Colchester. Jobs and homes are very important. When Colchester was, as people seem to want to go back to, 50, 60 years ago, a market town, we wouldn't have Greenstead, we wouldn't have Highwoods, we wouldn't have Chesterwell. And these are now communities and developments that are either still evolving or have become settled communities that add value to our city. We're not here to be parochial or party political. We have to take into account the work that's been done. We have to have a local plan. I hope we're all agreed on that. And I think Councillor Dundas made that very point in his contribution. Without a local plan, we've seen what happens in other areas. It's a disaster, and we can't let that happen here. So, do we vote for it, or do we vote to take it forward, or do we not? Well, we could send it to Angela Rayner and her ministerial team and the civil servants in the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government and wash our hands of it, but that would be, to me, I probably wouldn't be as comfortable with that as some around this committee, but they'd be deeply irresponsible and a dereliction of duty to do that. It's our local plan. We are the local representatives for Colchester who've been elected to make these tough decisions. And that's why we're here tonight. And I think we've got to face up to it. As Councillor Scottish said, I think, democratically, we've got to give this to the people of Colchester to comment on. It's not perfect, it's flawed, even the officers will admit that, but then take those representations and at the end of the process, all 51 councillors will get to vote on it. And I think, as someone who's been through a few local plans in my time on this council, this is good work and we should take it forward and take it forward to Reg 19. And that should be the decision we make tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor Moffat, last but not least.
Thank you, Chair.
Well, there may be others, but,
Thank you, Chair. So, first of all, thank you to the officers for putting this together. It must have taken, days and weeks, but it did take hours as well to read. But thank you also for being available for questions leading up to this. It was very useful. I'm not taking a position tonight for or against any individual field or plots, because I think our responsibility has to be to consider what's best for Colchester as a whole. I obviously represent Mile End, and in the whole 20 years I've been there, we've been building houses for the whole 20 years. So I just want to put a quick comment on delivery. Allocating land doesn't automatically mean that the houses will be built there immediately. And as Karen mentioned, last year was 658, did you say, houses built last year? So there's a demand and a market element to all of this as well. Developers will build according to that demand, the sales rates, the viability, and their own business cases. So that's not really in our control. We've also spoken about water and infrastructure today. I share all of those concerns, obviously, but I don't want to be repetitive. But I think if we refuse to move this plan forwards, those problems won't go away. They'll still be here. Agree with others that the temptation could be to go back to the government and say, you created this problem, now you should sort it out. But I don't think that will be in the best interest of Colchester as well, so I agree with others. I also support the working group and would be happy to serve if asked. So, yeah, that's it. I will support it reluctantly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moffat. Are there any other councillors wishing to speak? Okay, well, in that case, we have a recommendation for item 7, which is on page 19 of your 1,502-page bundle. That I believe is slightly longer than War and Peace, which means the officers have exceeded themselves. I hope that's not a record they're trying to beat each time. That recommendation on page 19 is section 2.1, which notes the significant public representations in response to Regulation 18, notes the Council's response to the key issues raised in those representations, delegates authority to the Service Director Planning, Sustainability and Climate Change in consultation with the Chair of the Local Plan Committee and Group Spokes to make any necessary minor amendments, corrections, presentations, changes to a submission, the draft Colchester Local Plan prior to publication. And the key bit, in accordance with the Council's Constitution and Scheme of Delegation, the Local Plan Committee is asked to approve publication of the submission, draft Colchester Local Plan, accompanying policies, maps, sustainability appraisal, attached as Appendix A and B, respectively, and consultation under Regulation 19 of the Town and Country Planning, Local Plan, England Regulations 2012, as amended. For the benefit of members of the public, that bit of gobbledygook basically means we are voting on whether to put the draft local plan, unhappy as many of us are with it, out to the pre-inspection public consultation. If we do that, it will still need to be voted on by the full council some point next year. If we vote against that, we will effectively kill the plan, which, because of the timescale of local government reorganisation, means we are unlikely to have any plan for the next 5 years. Councillor Hagan and Councillor Dundas. Councillor Hagan first.
I'll let Councillor Dundas go first.
It's just, Chair, just for clarity, Chair, I understood actually that usually the plan, after the Reg 19 inspection, it comes back to this committee, and then this committee has another vote as to whether they are happy with it enough to send it to inspection, and I just think you might have missed out that stage.
The Deputy Chief Executive is confirming that you are absolutely right, Councillor Dundas. In November. Yeah.
And Chair, I just want to make absolutely clear here to everyone that there is enough time to deliver this if this decision is taken tonight. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm just looking at James's head of planning.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
So we will now move to the vote. Do we have a proposer for the recommendation in section 2.1 on page 19 of item 7, please? Okay, Councillor Kirkby-Taylor has proposed. I will... Councillor McLean, I was about to second, but Councillor McLean has beat me to the post. Okay, so we have a proposer and a seconder. Could I see those in favour, please?
(11 in favour).
And those against? And by my maths,
1 against.
That means there cannot be any abstentions. And unless anyone wants to challenge my maths on 11 plus 1 equals 12. Thank you very much for your time, councillors, officers and long-serving members of the public who have stayed beyond the call of duty. But we do appreciate you being here, and thank you very much everyone for your time. Obviously this is not the end of the process. and there will be further consultations